Hi everybody. I am Storyteller, and today I am here to accompany you. I know you're using this video to gradually fall asleep, so before we begin, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your support is the biggest motivation for me to continue bringing more fascinating and scary stories. Now, lie down comfortably, relax your body, and breathe gently. Tonight, the hallway was as always, immersed in darkness, with only weak light from the flickering lights on the ceiling. They never shine enough to dispel the gloomy and cold feeling that always surrounds this place. This is where I've lived for over a year, but tonight, I feel different. Everything seems to have changed. An imperceptible change, but I could feel it. At this moment, I stood at the beginning of the hallway, my legs shaking a little. The coldness coming from the wall made me feel like it was squeezing my chest. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, but the tension in my body couldn't be dispelled. This feeling is truly indescribable. An invisible fear, I don't know where it came from, but it kept following me like an obsession. I can't forget that first evening, when I just came back from work late and passed by this hallway. My footsteps echoed like echoes in the quiet space, I could even hear my own breathing. A cold feeling passed over my shoulder, a slight push made me almost fall. That was the first moment that I felt the presence of something here. That night, I thought I was too tired and stressed after a long day of work. But as time went on, the strange events became more and more frequent. This doesn't just happen to me. The surrounding neighbors also began to feel inexplicable things. The sound of footsteps walking in the hallway when no one was around, the lights turning off and on by themselves, strange winds blowing suddenly, making the atmosphere even heavier. I decided to share what I felt in the group chat of the building's residents. The answers I received were not consolations, but strangely similar stories. One person said that on a cold night, she felt a cold wind blowing across her neck even though there were no windows open. Another person saw a dark shadow at the end of the hallway, just blinking and it was gone. We began to realize that I wasn't the only one who felt this way. The whole building, although no one admitted it completely, all sensed something unusual. Every night, that hallway becomes more and more bizarre. I heard light footsteps, but when I turned around, I didn't see anyone. The air became heavy, the light became weaker and weaker. And then one night, I decided to do something to prove everything I felt was true. I picked up my phone, turned on the camera and started walking through the dark hallway. The light from the phone was just enough for me to see cracks in the floor, strange shadows flickering at the end of the hallway. Every step I took seemed to increase the feeling of fear. I could hear my every breath, my heart pounding. A slight hiss, a cold wind wrapped around me, making me stand still, unable to move. The darkness in front of me seemed to thicken, as if something was waiting for me at the end of the hallway. Suddenly, the phone light went off. I panicked, my eyes looked dimly in the darkness, not knowing where I was standing. Suddenly, a weak light flashed, and I saw a strange figure flash past, like a tall, shadowy person, with no face and no eyes. It was just a ghost that passed by me so quickly that I couldn't register any details. The phone fell from my hand, I bent down to pick it up, cold sweat broke out on my forehead. The camera's playback had just started, and for a brief moment I saw something, a tall, indistinct shape, disappearing into the darkness. My blood seemed to freeze. I couldn't believe my eyes. Did I really see that? The next morning, I couldn't tell anyone. What I recorded is inexplicable, and I cannot share it with anyone because no one can understand. Everything is vague, fuzzy and unbelievable. But I can't deny that feeling. It is still there, in every step, in every moment when I face that hallway. Every night, I can't shake the feeling that something is watching me, something that doesn't belong here. I couldn't sleep that night. My eyes opened wide and I looked up at the ceiling, dark shadows still lingering in my mind. I remember that hazy image, a tall shadow, no face, no eyes. It felt like a nightmare existing right in the real world. I closed my eyes, but the image refused to leave. And then, when I finally fell asleep, I dreamed of it. In the dream, I stood at the beginning of the hallway. That space was empty, only the sound of my footsteps echoed in the quiet space. I walked, each step heavier, as if someone was pulling me from behind. Suddenly, a cold wind blew past me, making my skin goosebumps. I turned around, and at the end of the hallway, I saw a shadow. It stood there, silent, not moving. I tried to scream but couldn't make a sound. That shadow slowly moved towards me, each step making the space colder and denser. I woke up gasping for breath, cold sweat drenching the back of my shirt. The whole room was in darkness. But I could feel it, that presence, the shadow I had seen in my dreams, now not only existing in my dreams but possibly present here, in this room. I jumped up and opened the window so the cool air could dispel my worries. But the air outside just made me feel like a thick layer of fog was covering me. The next day, I decided to talk to the neighbors. I cannot continue to live in this fear alone. Anyway, it seems I'm not the only one who feels this way. I met a woman who lived 2 apartments away from me. Her name was Lila. She smiled when I started talking about the strange events I had experienced, but her smile was incomplete. Her eyes were somehow dark, as if she had seen things I had never imagined. "Do you feel that too?" Lila asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Does it feel like someone is always watching, like something invisible is waiting for us in the dark?" I nodded. Cold sweat began to break out again. Lila told me about a time she felt a cold wind blowing across her neck late one night, even though there were no windows open. She thought it was just fatigue or psychological stress, but as time went on, she felt a strange presence, as if someone was standing behind her, even though she couldn't turn around to look. Another person in the building, Ethan, texted me about a time in the middle of the night when he saw a figure walking through the hallway, but when he blinked, the figure was gone. He also started to feel like something was wrong, even though he couldn't explain it. This strange feeling doesn't just happen to me. The whole building seems haunted by it. The stories began to stretch, all with similar details: shadowy figures, inexplicable noises, lights that strangely turned off on their own. I know, I can't be the only one who has seen or felt those things. It was a part of us, something inexplicable, but too real to ignore. Just like that, I live in restlessness, unable to escape the feeling that someone is always watching. Every night I dreaded walking down the hallway, which always made me feel tense, as if something inexplicable was waiting for me at the end. The hallway light still flickered non-stop, a weak light, never enough to dispel the cold silence. And then, that night, I decided to do something. I have to document what's happening, regardless of whether it might just be the product of excessive anxiety or something real. I picked up my phone, turned on video mode and walked into the hallway. It felt like something was looking at me. Each step I took became heavier and heavier. Every step is like a challenge, every breath is like an effort. The hallway lights flickered and made annoying creaking sounds. The video was in slow motion, with nothing but darkness and the sound of my footsteps. Suddenly, my phone light went off, without warning. I stopped. In the dark, the space became thick like fog. I couldn't distinguish which was the floor and which was the wall. A cold wind brushed the back of my neck, making me shiver. When the phone light turned back on, I saw it. A blurry shadow passed by at the end of the hallway. Too fast, too blurry, not clear enough for me to capture with my camera. My heart was pounding. I threw the phone on the floor. The crack sound rang out, making the atmosphere heavier. The video replaying on the screen almost took my breath away. I could see a tall, slender shape with no visible face, just a gloomy silhouette passing quickly, disappearing as soon as I could make out. My blood was cold, my limbs could no longer feel. The whole world seemed to collapse right before my eyes. I don't know what I did, but I'm sure I can't face it anymore. That feeling continues to follow me, not letting go. The following nights, I heard strange noises in my room. Soft taps, gasps, sounds I couldn't explain. I cannot escape that obsession. Not only me, but also the residents in this building began to feel something was not right. Every time night falls, I'm afraid to step out of the apartment, not because I don't dare face the darkness, but because I know that something is waiting for me in there. And then, one day, a neighbor, whom I had never met, sent me a message in the building's group chat. Have you ever heard footsteps in the middle of the night? Or something softly walking through the hallway? If so, don't worry, I heard them too. But maybe, we're just haunted. Even though he said that, I didn't feel any comfort from those words. It only made me more nervous, realizing that perhaps I wasn't the only one haunted by the darkness in that hallway. In the nights that followed, I couldn't help but feel the tension rise as darkness descended. Every time I passed through the hallway, my steps rang like an alarm bell in the quiet space, awakening strange things hidden deep in the darkness. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Every time I turned my back, I thought I heard someone's footsteps gently following me. Every night was the same, and I began to be unable to distinguish between reality and paranoia. And then one night, I decided I couldn't wait any longer. I had to face my fears, had to prove that I wasn't haunted by invisible noises, passing shadows. But am I really afraid of something real, or is it just an obsession in my mind? I have prepared thoroughly. Camera in hand, I walked into the hallway at midnight, when all the other residents were asleep. The space was so quiet that you could hear your every breath. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, trying to dispel the fear in my heart, but when I opened my eyes, once again, the coldness had enveloped my body. My steps echoed in the quiet space, each step seemed heavier, as if there was an invisible weight pressing down on me. The hallway lights flicker as a sign of insecurity. Each of those weak lights was like a warning that I was entering a place with no way out. I turned on the camera, letting it record every moment and every step I took. There's no one here, just me, the camera, and the darkness. There was a strange feeling from the walls, cold air of unknown origin seeping into my skin, as if this space was alive, observing me. Every step I take makes me feel more and more that there is something waiting. When I reached the middle of the hallway, my phone light suddenly went off. Everything became dark as if submerged in a bottomless abyss. My heart was pounding, I stopped, my breathing became rapid. I hurriedly turned the phone light back on, but when the light returned, I felt a presence right behind me. An icy cold ran down my spine. I turned around, and I saw it. A black shadow, with no clear shape, just a blur, like a cloud of smoke, but it was tall and moved strangely. My legs were stiff, unable to move. I felt like I was nailed to place, unable to escape that blurred gaze. And then, in just a split second, that shadow disappeared into space, as if it had dissolved into the very darkness of the hallway. I stood there, eyes wide open, looking around, but there was only silence, as if I had just had a nightmare. My heart is still beating wildly in my chest. The video on the phone was still playing, and I saw something I couldn't believe my eyes. That shadow had passed across the screen, a shadowy, unidentifiable shape. I couldn't do anything but gasp, the feeling of fear was suffocating me. Running home was the only thing I could do. I rushed into my apartment, slammed the door, trying to catch my breath. I sat down on the chair, still unable to comprehend what I had just seen. I wondered if I was crazy, or if something really existed in the darkness of that hallway. The next day, I decided I had to share the video with my neighbors. Maybe they will understand, maybe they will help me explain, or at least share what they have been through. I met Ethan, the neighbor who texted me earlier. He shook his head, looking at my phone screen. This can't be real. It's too blurry. It could be the lighting blurring the image, or it's just your nerves. But I could see the worry in his eyes, eyes that couldn't hide the insecurity. We all sat there for a long while, no one said anything. I know Ethan is trying to convince himself that everything is just a product of his imagination. But I sensed an insecurity in him, a fear similar to mine, and it couldn't simply be due to stress. The next night, I faced the same hallway again, with its strange shadows and sounds. But this time, I don't go alone. I had Lila and Ethan with me. We stood in front of my apartment, looking at each other, our eyes filled with worry. "We have to go down the hall," I said, my voice shaking. "We have to find out what's going on." We started walking down the hallway, and as soon as our first step touched the ground, a cold feeling immediately enveloped us. Flickering lights and weak light are not enough to dispel the heavy feeling in this space. Every step we took became heavier and heavier, as if an invisible force was pulling us down, forcing us into darkness. Suddenly, from the end of the hallway, we heard a sound, a light rustling. We stopped, looked at each other, our hearts pounding. No one said anything, but we all felt that something was wrong. The cold wind blew again, as if it had been following us for a long time. We moved on, and this time, we couldn't stop. There is something waiting, and we cannot give up. Ethan, Lila, and Miles stood in the dark hallway, the cold feeling of space enveloping them. The hallway lights flickered weakly, the flickering light was not enough to dispel the fear rising in everyone's hearts. Each step they took seemed to last forever, their feet seemed tied tightly by the invisible weight of silence and darkness. Lila turned around, her eyes filled with worry. "Are you sure we have to go deeper, Ethan? There's nothing here but darkness." Ethan, clutching his phone, the light from it drifted across the hallway, trying to illuminate the road ahead. "We have to move on, Lila. If we don't find out the truth, we'll never escape this feeling. I can't keep living in this fear forever." Miles, who was always silent, walked behind, his eyes never leaving the shadows around them. "It feels like someone is watching us," he whispered, his voice trembling. But when I turned around, there was no one. "Don't worry," Ethan said, his voice steady. "We can't let this feeling control us. Everything will be okay." They continued walking, passing through cracks in the walls, patches of peeling paint, as if this hallway had been forgotten for a long time. The light at the end of the hallway suddenly flickered stronger, then went out again, leaving an overwhelming silence. The atmosphere became even heavier, as if something invisible was watching their every step. As they neared the end of the hallway, a soft sound rang out. Rustling sounds, as if someone was moving behind them. Lila stopped, turning around in panic. "Hear that? There's something behind us." Miles glanced back. "There's no one. But I also feel something." Ethan looked at them both, feeling the tension in the air. "Maybe it's just our echo. Don't worry." But as soon as he finished speaking, a louder noise echoed from the end of the hallway, a clear sound of footsteps, almost chasing them. All three of them stopped, their hearts pounding in their chests. Ethan turned around, but saw only darkness, no one there. Lila, her face pale, looked into Ethan's eyes. "Are you sure we shouldn't leave here?" "We can't give up," Ethan replied, his voice determined. "We have to know the truth. We can't just run away forever." And then, they continued towards the end of the hallway. But this time, there was no confidence in their step. They know, something is waiting ahead. Something inexplicable, but clearly there. As they neared the end of the hallway, the lights suddenly flickered violently, then went out. The space is in complete darkness. Lila quickly turned on her phone's light, but the light was only enough for her to see blurry walls, nothing clear. They couldn't even see each other's faces. "Stop!" Miles shouted. I see something." Ethan hurriedly turned the phone's light on brighter, and then they saw it, a dark figure standing at the end of the hallway. The shadow was tall, had no clear shape, just a blurry shadow, standing motionless. Their eyes opened wide, unable to believe what they were seeing. That black shadow began to move. Not on foot, but as if it floated through space, approaching them in an instant. All three people couldn't move, their hearts were beating so loudly that they could be heard in their ears. Then, for a brief moment, the shadow disappeared. No sound, no trace, just empty space. "We have to get out of here," Lila shouted, rushing towards the door. Ethan and Miles didn't say anything, they just ran after her. Every step carried fear, as if something was chasing them. As they turned around to run into their apartment, the feeling of not being able to breathe washed over them. They closed the door, not daring to look back. Their hearts were still pounding, and they were drenched in cold sweat. They stood in silence, no one said anything. That shadow, is it real? They all knew that what they saw was not an illusion. But what they cannot understand is the reason why. Why does it appear? And what does it want from them? Ethan raised his head, his eyes shining with determination. "We have to find out the truth. We can't live forever in this fear." Lila and Miles looked at each other, then nodded. Even though they were scared, they knew they couldn't give up. This darkness cannot continue to control them. Ethan has lived in this apartment building for more than a year. This is a quiet, well-maintained place, with polite neighbors who often nod in the elevator and occasionally share a friendly joke in the hallway. But there was something about this building that he couldn't explain, something that no one else could explain. The hallway on the floor where he lived was always gloomy. One light bulb in the ceiling light fixture was always flickering, and the other bulb was never bright enough. Everyone complained about it, but no one did anything more than make a request to the building manager. Most people consider it just one of the building's odd features. Late one evening, after a tiring day at work, Ethan stepped out of the elevator and into the hallway. The light from the strobe lights flickered weakly, bathing the walls in a pale glow. The silence around him today seemed heavier than usual, pressing against his ears. He walked towards his apartment door, when he suddenly felt something brush his shoulder. A slight push caused him to stumble into the wall. His heart sank, he turned around reflexively. The hallway is empty. The elevator door closed behind him. There was no sign of any neighbors in a hurry or even a shadow that could explain what he had just felt. This was the first time he felt a push, a presence that wasn't his own. His hand immediately went to his chest, his heart pounding in his chest. His mouth was dry. The silence of the hallway seemed to taunt him, as if it challenged him, challenged his own feelings. Ethan struggled to walk. His fingers trembled as he tried to unlock the apartment, trying 3 times before turning the key correctly. Once inside, he turned on all the lights in the living room, hoping to dispel the growing fear in his heart. But as he tried to sleep that night, the incident kept replaying in his head. The feeling of being pushed, the empty hallway, too real to ignore. The next morning, tired and sweaty, he quickly typed a short message into the building's chat group. "Has anyone ever felt like someone was walking past them in the hallway, especially on my floor?" Immediately, he received many answers. A woman from 2 doors down from him said she felt a cold breeze blowing across her neck one night, even though there were no windows open. Another neighbor privately texted him that late one night he thought he caught a glimpse of a figure at the end of the hallway, but it disappeared as soon as he blinked. None of them heard or saw any clear figures. However, these stories are so strange that they are similar. Some people joked that it might just be an overactive imagination, but those half-joking answers didn't help Ethan at all. Instead, it made him realize how many people in the building had sensed something was wrong. Several days passed without incident and Ethan almost convinced himself that he was simply exhausted. But the very next week, when he returned home later than usual, the hallway welcomed him again. This time, the light of the flashing lights was stronger than before, the air became colder, his body felt like it was prickling under the invisible weight of an inexplicable observation. This time, the key was ready in hand, and he prepared to open the door as soon as he arrived. But when passing through the middle of the corridor, the temperature seemed to drop. A chill ran down his spine. His heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his ears. This time, there was no push, but he heard something. A low hiss, or perhaps a breeze, passed by his ears. It was enough to make him stagger forward, his legs as hard as rocks. He almost dropped the key when trying to open the door. Once inside, he slammed the door shut and leaned against the wood, trying to catch his breath. He felt his heartbeat in every inch of his body. He thought about calling the doorman or alerting building security about possible intruders. But who would believe him if he reported an invisible presence that left no trace other than trembling nerves? In the following days, the group chat became more active. One neighbor said that he had heard faint footsteps walking in the hallway at odd hours, although whenever he looked through the peephole, he saw no one. Another person wrote that he had seen overhead lights turn off on their own, leaving the hallway in almost complete darkness for a few seconds at a time. The building manager confirmed that the electrical wiring was old and needed replacing, and scheduled an electrician to come make repairs. However, repairs were constantly delayed. Stories continued to be shared. People started avoiding hallways late at night if possible. Some people even take the stairs from the lower or upper floors to bypass the hallway altogether. Ethan tried to continue normally, but his nerves were frayed. In the morning, things weren't so bad, the hallway was as gloomy as usual, but the daylight streaming in from the small window in the distance gave him some peace of mind. But his biggest worries always accumulate at the end of the day, when he knows he will have to walk through that space in the dark. Every time he stepped out of the elevator, he felt a tension as if someone was looking at him, as if something was waiting for him. One night, Ethan decided he had to gather evidence of what was happening. He put his phone in his pocket, turning on the camera, ready to record any bizarre events. He left home around 11 o'clock and arrived at the building at midnight. The hallway was dark except for the broken light. He held up his phone and began filming as he walked, his heart beating like a war drum in his chest. The silence of the hallway was as thick as if the air was turning into fog. Each step he took felt heavier than the last. Suddenly, his phone light went off for a second. Maybe it was a technical problem, maybe it was nerves that made him loosen his grip. The darkness enveloped him so completely that he became disoriented. When the lights turned back on, he saw something at the edge of the screen. An outline, as if passing through the hallway out of the frame too quickly for him to register any details. He picked up the phone and turned on playback mode, not daring to take another step. His mouth went dry as he watched the video. For a fraction of a second, he saw a shape. It was tall and slender, with no eyes, its face just the suggestion of a dark shadow. His blood froze and his breathing became labored. He forced himself to walk back to the apartment, holding his phone so tightly that his knuckles ached. The next morning, Ethan tried to show the video to one of the neighbors, who had also reported strange incidents. He looked at the screen, eyes narrowed, leaning in as if trying to see better. Finally, he admitted that he saw a faint movement in the corner of the frame, but not clearly enough to prove anything. He suggests that maybe we're scared because of a glitch, or that the flickering light has created a shadow. However, he couldn't hide the worry in his eyes. After watching the video again, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling of being haunted. The video in his hand was undeniable evidence, although it was so faint and fast that it was impossible to confirm with certainty. However, the fear did not lessen, on the contrary, it became more intense. Every time he stepped outside, he felt like he was being watched, like there was something in the darkness waiting. Ethan couldn't sleep, couldn't rest. Every night, that hallway appeared in his dreams. In the dream, he stood there, looking into the vast darkness, the space seemed to stretch endlessly. Every step he took seemed to become more and more difficult, as if there was an invisible force preventing him from moving forward. The darkness was not just a part of the hallway, but a living creature, waiting to devour him. One night, Ethan decided he couldn't let fear take over. He was determined to return to that hallway and face it again. But this time, he didn't go alone. He invites Lila and Miles to join him. They have heard enough strange stories and feel the threat that is covering this place. They could not continue to live in doubt. It's time to find out the truth, no matter how scary it is. When the three people stood in front of Ethan's apartment door, they looked at each other, their eyes reflecting worry. But there is also determination in it. They know they can't keep living in this darkness forever. Together, they walked out of the apartment and into the cold hallway. Lila was the first to walk away, the light from her phone illuminating a small part of the gloomy hallway. They continued walking, step by step. The deeper they went into the hallway, the more their sense of fear grew. Each weak light from the flickering lamps was not enough to dispel the overwhelming fear. Suddenly, a noise rang out, a soft but distinct sound of footsteps, as if someone was walking behind them. Lila turned around immediately, panic in her eyes. "There's someone here," she exclaimed. Miles stopped and looked back, but the hallway was still empty. "No one," he said, sounding worried. Ethan held the phone tightly, trying to stay calm. "Don't panic. It could be a reflected sound, or it could be us ourselves feeling it." But all three knew that this wasn't normal. They couldn't explain the feeling that something was watching them, something invisible, intangible but present every moment. They continued toward the end of the hallway, each step like they were getting closer to something they couldn't understand. Then, as they neared the end of the hallway, a noise rang out, a soft whisper this time, like someone breathing nearby. They stopped, stood quietly, listening carefully. Nothing but silence weighed upon them. Then suddenly, a dark shadow flashed past the end of the hallway, so fast that they couldn't see clearly. "Run!" Miles shouted, pulling Lila and Ethan towards the apartment door. Each step seemed to double their speed, as if something was chasing them, invisible but clearly felt. When they reached the apartment door, Ethan hastily turned the key, and the three of them quickly went inside, closed the door and leaned against it, panting, feeling like they had just escaped from something terrible. No one said anything, just silence. They all understood that what they had just seen was not their imagination. That black shadow is not an illusion. But the strange thing is, none of them can explain it, or how that thing appeared in the hallway of this building. "What should we do now?" Lila finally spoke, her voice trembling. Ethan looked at them both, his eyes filled with determination. "We can't keep living like this forever. We have to find out the truth about what's happening. We can't let it haunt us forever." Miles nodded. "We can't just hide forever. We have to find out, no matter how scary it is." The three looked at each other, worry still in each of their eyes, but also an unusual determination. They knew that this corridor, this darkness, could not continue to control them. They have to face it, no matter what the cost. After sitting silently in the apartment, the three friends said nothing more. The air was as heavy as the darkness outside that was encroaching on them. Ethan felt that there was only one way to escape this feeling, face it. But how to understand what is happening in this building? How to break this vicious cycle of fear? Miles, who hadn't said anything for a while, spoke up. "What do we do next? Things are only getting worse. That darkness. I can't get that image out of my head." Lila looked at Ethan, her eyes still filled with worry. "Are you sure this is a good idea? For all of us to continue down that hallway, in the middle of the night, when no one can explain what's going on? We could be walking into a trap." Ethan took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "We can't keep living in fear forever. We need to find the truth. Otherwise, this feeling will kill us every day." Although worried, Lila and Miles knew Ethan was right. This feeling cannot last. They must face the darkness, not just out of curiosity, but for survival. Just a few minutes later, they stood in the hallway again, this time with more mental preparation. Ethan, Lila, and Miles all held their phones, turning on video mode to record everything. They not only want to face the darkness, but also want evidence to explain these strange things to others, if needed. The hallway was silent again, except for the sound of three people's footsteps echoing in the quiet space. The light from the flickering, lifeless lamps was not nearly enough to illuminate the path before them. Each step they took seemed to last forever, the feeling of that space becoming endless. It seemed like there was something surrounding them, invisible but very clear. "Don't pay attention to the darkness, just focus ahead," Ethan said, trying to keep everyone on their toes. Lila nodded, walking closely after him. Miles walked last, his eyes constantly scanning around, sensing even the smallest noise. As they passed through the middle of the hallway, suddenly, the lights went out. A dark space covered the entire space, making the three people confused and stopped. Their hearts pounded in their chests, but no one dared to speak. Ethan turned on his phone's light, but the weak light was only enough to illuminate a few steps ahead. He looked around, unable to see anything but dense darkness. "Let's move on," Ethan said firmly. "We can't go back." They continued walking, but this time, there was a strange feeling. The atmosphere suddenly changed. It became thick and cold. Their footsteps no longer resonate like before. Suddenly, from behind, a light noise rang out. A very faint rustling sound, as if something was moving after them. Lila turned around, her eyes wide with fear. "There's something behind us," she exclaimed. Ethan turned around, but there was nothing but darkness. He shook his head, trying to stay calm. "There's no one, maybe there's noise from outside. But this is not easy to convince Miles. I feel like someone's nearby," he whispered, unable to hide the panic in his voice. At that moment, the black shadow they had seen suddenly appeared. It did not stand still but moved towards them at an unimaginable speed. Although the shape was unknown, that shadow was tall and shadowy, like a giant creature gliding through space, touching their very presence. Their hearts beat as fast as drums, no one dared to look back. "Run!" Ethan shouted. Without thinking, they simultaneously turned their backs and rushed towards the apartment door. All three people ran without stopping, as if they had no feeling in their legs, only the urge to escape that black shadow. They didn't know if that shadow was chasing them or not, but they didn't dare turn back to check. When they finally reached the apartment door, Ethan quickly turned the key, opened the door, and slammed it shut behind him. Cold sweat beaded their foreheads, and their bodies trembled in panic. They stood there, not daring to breathe loudly. None of the three said anything, but they all knew that the darkness in the hallway was not a game. It's real. And this time, no one can deny it anymore. After a long while, Lila spoke up, her voice trembling. "Maybe it's watching us. But what now? What do we do next?" Ethan took a deep breath, his eyes determined. "We can't live in this fear anymore. We have to find the truth. We have to face it." Miles nodded, saying nothing, but his eyes were also filled with determination. Although still afraid, they know that the truth is the only thing that can free them from this nightmare. Another neighbor in the building texted in the group chat that she could have sworn she heard whispering in the hallway when no one was around. Although no one has yet truly explained these phenomena, the consensus in the community is that something is wrong, but no one can agree on a solution. Some people suggested asking someone to clean the hallways or change the lights, others laughed, dismissing it as just collective hallucinations. Meanwhile, the flickering light problem remains unresolved, and the maintenance department continues to explain supply shortages or scheduling conflicts. But one thing that cannot be denied is that they just don't want to deal with the problem at night. Ethan reached his limit when he woke up one morning to find muddy footprints near his apartment door. They lasted about 3 steps and then suddenly disappeared. The size of the footprint was too large to be his. His shoes were clean and showed no traces of dirt from other neighbors. Shivering, he took photos and cleaned the area. Then he shared the picture in the group chat, and the conversation exploded. A few neighbors admit they have also found unexplained footprints, although the tracks can vary in size and shape. They requested a thorough investigation, but the security department insisted there was no relevant footage, because the hallway cameras seemed to malfunction at the exact hours mentioned. From that day on, Ethan's entire perspective changed. It's not just flashing hallway lights or strange feelings. He realized that something inexplicable was lurking there, despite all the logical explanations people tried to come up with. His senses became more acute, but at the same time they were about to reach the point of overload. Every time he walked through dimly lit areas, he couldn't help but expect to see that shadowy shape, just like in the video, flash out of the corner of his eye. One evening, he decided to face the presence he had felt head-on. It wasn't an easy decision, but he yearned to find a solution or at least gain some clarity. With a powerful flashlight in hand and his phone to record everything, Ethan decided to stay in the hallway longer than usual, based on previous reports, to make sure he would encounter it around midnight, when its appearance seemed to have a common denominator. When I reached my floor, the hallway was darker than ever. The overhead lights were completely turned off. His heartbeat was pounding, erratic as if it was about to burst beneath his skin. He turned on the flashlight, the beam of light gliding across the walls, floors, and closed apartment doors. The silence in the hallway seemed deafening, as if he were entering an empty space where even his breathing was too loud. Every step he took echoed faintly as if there were 2 footsteps. His nerves were taut like live electric wires, his skin was covered with shivers. As he walked about 3/4 of the way down the hallway, he felt a change in the air. It was a small change in pressure, as if something huge was passing by. His flashlight flashed vigorously even though the battery was still full. A second later, he felt a presence right next to him, near the wall. He shined a beam of light on it, and adrenaline rushed through his veins. His body trembled, his mouth went dry, his heart pounded so hard he was sure it would burst in his chest. For a split second, he saw a ripple in the darkness, like a black sheet billowing in a wind he couldn't feel. His eyes began to water from the intensity of the moment. It's there, but it's not. His instincts screamed at him to run, but his feet remained stuck in place. He tried to mentally rehearse every possible explanation he could think of, a trick of the light, a sleep-deprived mind feeding on fear, or an illusion created by the darkness. None of this calmed the panic rising within him. Suddenly, without warning, he felt a tug on his sleeve, causing him to jump back. He staggered, his knees buckling. A choking sound escaped from my throat. His flashlight fell, spinning across the floor, its beam tracing dizzying arcs across the wall. He let out a cry and rushed forward to grab the flashlight that was rolling on the floor, clutching it like a lifeline. There was nothing there, only a swirl of shadows. His breathing was rapid, sweat drenched his forehead, and his shirt stuck to his back like a wet shirt. He crawled to his apartment door, half expecting it. He didn't know if there would be another strong pull anytime soon. Staggering, hands shaking, he went inside and slammed the door. That night, he realized that the hallway had a power beyond his understanding. He faced it head-on and survived, but the experience left him exhausted. His sense of security had been erased. In the following days, Ethan noticed that the lights in the hallway had finally been replaced. The flickering light has disappeared. The building manager assured everyone that the electrical problems had been fixed. But he cannot rest assured. An uneasy feeling remained, something inexplicable, still lurking in the darkness. Strangely, the frantic messages in the group chat subsided as if a tacit agreement hung in the air. We won't talk about that hallway anymore, as if by a mutual decision. It's too scary to explain, but it's also too hard to ignore. Even though the lights were no longer flickering and the hallways now looked normal, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched every time I stepped out of the elevator. Now, every time I step out of the elevator, I always prepare myself mentally. Even though the hallway seemed bright and no longer dark, I still felt that pressure on my shoulders, as if something invisible was always following me. Sometimes a light, ghostly touch startles me, and my nights are restless. I expected an invisible nudge, like hidden movements in space. Sometimes, I think I hear a gentle rustling on the other side of my front door in the wee hours of the night, but I don't open the door to check. Although there was nothing clear to prove, I felt that there was something lurking in that hallway, like an invisible force lurking, always near me. The feeling of being watched never went away, it just lay under the surface, waiting for the moment to explode. Honestly, I began to doubt whether I was overreacting, or whether something really existed in that hallway. And then, one day, I bought a painting. It's not just an ordinary picture. When I first looked at it, a chill ran through my body. The man in the painting is like no other. He was wearing an old fedora, standing in a gray haze. His eyes seemed to have a distinct life, as if they were watching each person passing by. I remember standing in the auction room, fluorescent lights buzzing above my head, feeling as if the man in the painting was quietly observing me and the others. The atmosphere in the room seemed to become heavy at that moment, and I felt my heart pounding before I placed my bid. A strange urge made me bring the painting home. I felt like I couldn't leave it behind. And I thought, maybe it's just an interesting conversation for my living room. But now, I realize I was wrong when I decided to hang the painting in the living room, leaning against the wall above the old wooden cupboard. It feels strange every time I look at the eyes of the man in the painting, his thin lips and the faint shadow under his cheekbones, as if he is looking straight at me. The first few days after hanging the painting, everything seemed normal, but I couldn't help but feel uncomfortable every time I sat in the living room. I found myself sitting in the far corner of the couch, trying to avoid his eyes. Sometimes, late at night, I catch myself glancing toward the painting. The look on the man's face in the canvas gave me the feeling that he noticed my scrutiny. Each time, my chest tightens, and I have to force myself to look away so I don't feel like I'm being watched. As time passed, I began to notice that friends and acquaintances who came to visit didn't say anything, but I could sense their discomfort. They didn't mention it directly, but the look in their eyes as they passed through the living room suggested that something was wrong with the painting. Some people even said, "It feels like someone is watching me." They even seemed uncomfortable when passing by the room. The eyes of the man in the painting seemed to always follow them. One night, the living room was lit only by a single lamp on the side table, casting sharp shadows on the wall. I was reading a magazine, trying to focus on an article about home renovations, but my eyes kept drawing to the picture. The light shining in highlighted the man's eyes in the painting. They sparkled as if he could see me. Goosebumps ran down my arms, and I turned away abruptly. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, as if someone was standing behind me. My breathing became rapid, and I had to exhale slowly, telling myself that I was being unreasonable. But each time, that feeling gets stronger. It was as if the painting was not an ordinary decoration. It was as if there was something hidden within it, a presence that I couldn't explain. And the more I looked into the eyes of the man in the painting, the more I felt like he was seeing through me, watching me every moment. I don't know what will happen if I continue to keep that painting in the house. Will I be able to live with it? Will I continue to feel that man's gaze, even though he is no longer here? But one thing I know for sure, the hallway, the painting, the presence of something I can't explain, they're all connected. And it never really left. The next day, I still felt a surge of discomfort as I entered the living room. The painting was still there, hanging silently on the wall, but the man's eyes in the painting seemed to have a life of their own, as if he was still looking at me, following me. That feeling seems indelible, no matter how hard I try to avoid it, trying to focus on work or reading. I began to feel like that picture was occupying my mind. Every time I walked into the living room, I felt my chest tighten, as if someone was standing right behind me. I cannot escape the clinging of those eyes. A few times, I thought I could see the man in the painting moving blurrily, but as soon as I looked back, the painting was back to normal. It was such a strange feeling that I couldn't explain it. Was I hallucinating, or could the painting itself actually contain something different, an invisible power? Late one night, as I was sitting in the living room, with only a small lamp illuminating me, I felt the eyes of the man in the painting fall on me. Unable to bear it any longer, I stood up and decided to face this fear. I approached the painting, trying to look straight into his eyes, as if to prove that I was no longer afraid. But when I looked into his eyes, I had a surprising feeling. Those eyes were no longer cold, but as if they were calling me, inviting me to enter a world that I could not understand. The feeling of stuffiness and restlessness increased even more. Not just the painting, but the whole room seemed to be changing. Everything becomes more blurry. My vision blurred. I felt like the room was shrinking and the space around me was shrinking, as if I was being sucked into something. I stood still, unable to move, my eyes still glued to the painting. And suddenly, I felt a cold wind pass over my shoulder, making me shiver. The whole space seemed to freeze for a moment. I could hear my own breathing, but everything around me was completely silent. At that moment, I heard footsteps from behind. My heart was pounding, and I turned around, but there was no one. The whole room was still empty. But as soon as I turned back to look at the painting, I saw a very small movement, as if the man in the painting was lifting his chin slightly, and his eyes moved again, touching mine. It wasn't an illusion anymore, it was a very real feeling. I felt like I was being watched, and the truth was, it wasn't just because of the picture. At this point, I no longer feel like I'm simply living in a house. This strange feeling enveloped me every time I entered the living room, every time I looked at that painting. A feeling as if I was living in a usurped space, a space that I had no control over. The next day, I decided to call my best friend, Jacob, to tell him what had happened. He listened patiently to me, then advised me to find someone who could help explain these strange phenomena, perhaps an expert in psychological or supernatural matters. He suggested that maybe I was having a phobia and needed to address this fear. But when Jacob visited me a few days later, he looked at the painting and immediately felt uncomfortable. He didn't say anything, but I could see the obvious discomfort in his eyes. "Are you sure you're okay?" he asked me, his voice a little worried. "I don't know," I replied, my eyes still glued to the painting. "I feel like I can't escape it. Like it's watching me." Jacob walked closer to the painting, observing it carefully. He looked into the eyes of the man in the painting and then looked back at me. "I don't know if there's really anything strange about this painting, but I think you should rethink keeping it in your house. If it makes you feel uncomfortable, maybe it's time to get rid of it." But I can't do that. Part of me didn't want to let the painting go. I couldn't leave it behind, just like I couldn't leave that hallway behind. Even though I knew that that feeling of fear had taken over me, I still couldn't escape the feeling that I needed to face it. The next day, when I returned to the living room, I looked at the painting and decided, no matter how scared I was, I would not let it control me. But when I looked into the eyes of the man in the painting, I felt a change. Those eyes, now, don't just look at me. They see right through me. A chill ran down my spine, and I knew that I had to face this, no matter how scary it was. I cannot live in fear forever. Even if I have to face something inexplicable, I have to face it. However, the belief that someone was in the same room as me grew stronger, causing my spine to stiffen and a chill to run from my lower back to the base of my skull. Every night, I felt the insecurity in my body rise to new heights. A few nights later, I heard a distinct popping sound coming from the wall. It's like the sound of wood shifting under pressure, or a nail being slowly pulled out of drywall. My heart was pounding in my chest. I stood there, ignoring my shaking legs, and approached the painting. The painting, while seemingly normal, was tilted to one side, no more than an inch apart but enough to attract my attention. Now it was facing straight towards my couch, as if adjusting its angle to get a better look at me. A bead of cold sweat ran down my temple and my tongue felt thick, my mouth dry as I tried to swallow. I carefully reached out just to the right of the frame and stepped back. In the silence that followed, the painting remained still. I wiped my damp palms on my jeans and heard my own rapid breathing. That initial incident was just the beginning. Over the next week, I discovered the painting had moved again, this time leaning more sharply inward, as if craning its neck. I've tried every practical explanation I can think of. Perhaps the rope at the back is a little loose, or perhaps the cars passing by on the road shake it, causing it to tilt. So I took the painting down and checked the wire meticulously and secured it more tightly to the wall hook. I put it back in, double-checking that everything was level. My efforts brought me brief relief. Within a day, the painting was bent again toward my favorite armchair. Standing close, I felt a slight pressure in the air, like a quiet hum. My heart rate skyrocketed, and a lump rose in my throat. During this time, I tried to maintain a normal appearance. I told a friend about my suspicions that the painting seemed to like to move on its own, but I joked in the hope that humor might dispel my worries. I received an annoyed shrug. My friends said they also felt something was wrong, like stepping into a cold place whenever they stood near the painting. That night, I slept fitfully, dreaming of figures standing at the foot of the bed, wearing fedoras that obscured every feature of their faces, but not their eyes. Even when I woke up, my heart was still pounding painfully in my chest. A series of smaller but increasingly worrying incidents pile up each day. Sometimes, when I sit down to read a book or work on my laptop, the overhead light will flicker. When I looked up, it seemed like the painting's face always had a subtly different expression. The corners of the man's mouth in the painting seemed more pinched or more obvious. My rational mind insisted that I was imagining things, perhaps I was nervous or exhausted. Still, I couldn't shake the tension that rose in my chest every time I caught that glimpse. The sense of time is also distorted. I found myself unsure if I had been sitting for minutes or hours, as if something in that room had warped my perception. By the time I realized how long I'd been sitting, my muscles were stiff and my palms were cold. I started avoiding the living room at night, finishing dinner in the kitchen and returning to the bedroom with a book, telling myself I just needed a change of scenery. But my avoidance only increased my fear. When I finally had to venture into that room, perhaps to retrieve something or straighten a stack of mail, I felt my heart rate spike before I even opened the door. The air in there felt heavier, as if the walls were being pressed inward. My nerves were so tense that the house's faint stream subsided, making my stomach churn with panic. One evening, I turned the lights a little brighter, turned on each lamp, stood in front of the painting, arms crossed, determined to face whatever was happening. I want to observe every nuance of its surface. Slowly, I ran my fingertips along the edges of the frame, looking for any mechanical tricks. The brush strokes are thick and somewhat rough, typical of old paintings. The background is hazy, intentionally almost foggy, giving the characters a feeling of emerging from or melting into the darkness. The man's face was expressionless, but strangely intense. He wore a dark overcoat, and the wide brim of his fedora hat made half of his features half of his features. My feeling in that moment is hard to describe. Everything around me seemed to lose its solidity, as if I were falling into a bottomless pit of darkness. I was no longer sure whether I was facing a painting or facing my own invisible fear. In the days that followed, things got even stranger. I don't dare sit in the living room for long anymore. At night, I avoided the eyes of the man in the painting. His eyes always followed me, as if they had a life of their own. But every time I walked through the living room, I couldn't help but feel as if something was watching me. That look of his haunted me, making me unable to calm down. Even though everything seemed normal on the outside, part of me still felt a different presence, something lurking in this room. I started staying away from the living room at night. Instead of sitting down to relax, I returned to the bedroom, a book in hand, convincing myself that I just needed a change of scenery. But every time I close the door, I feel like a part of me is still left in the living room, unable to escape. I told myself that I was paranoid, that it was all just hallucinations caused by stress and anxiety, but that strange feeling remained indelible. One evening, when I had to go back to the living room to get some essentials, I felt a change in the air. It was a small change, almost imperceptible, but enough for me to feel my body tense. I stood in front of the painting, trying not to look into those eyes, but I couldn't. The eyes of the man in the painting were still watching me, as if they could see through every thought in my mind. I closed my eyes, convincing myself that it was just a trick of the light, or maybe I was just too tired. But when I opened my eyes, those eyes were still there, looking at me. A fear engulfed me. I felt trapped in a vicious cycle that I couldn't escape. One night, I woke up in the middle of a nightmare, my heart pounding in my chest. I felt like something was standing next to my bed, watching me. I opened my eyes, looked around, but there was no one. However, that feeling still sticks with me. I turned on the night light, but still couldn't shake the anxiety and feeling like I was being watched. The next day, I couldn't stand it anymore. I called Jacob, a close friend with whom I had been talking about strange things going on in my apartment. I can't just stay silent and wait for these things to continue. Jacob arrived, and when he looked at the picture, he also felt something was wrong. He didn't say it, but I could see the discomfort in his eyes. "Are you sure everything's okay?" he asked, his voice worried. "I don't know," I replied. "It's as if there's something in the picture, it's not just a picture." Jacob nodded. "I understand how you feel. It seems like this painting affected you a lot. Do you think it could have a real impact on your mind?" I don't know how to answer. I don't want to say that I felt haunted, but I really couldn't escape that feeling. I want to remove the picture, but I can't. It keeps clinging to me, as if I can't shake it off. I feel like there's something strange in this space, something that I can't explain. The next night, I decided to try facing this feeling again. I turned on all the lights in the living room, not leaving a single light off. Standing in front of the painting, I took a deep breath, trying to control the feeling of fear rising in my heart. I decided I wouldn't let it control me anymore. I began to examine the painting more closely. I ran my hand over the edges of the frame, looking closely at the brushstrokes. Even though I didn't want to admit it, I couldn't help but feel a strange presence there. Every stroke, every detail in the painting seems to be talking to me, as if this painting is not an ordinary work of art but a door opening into another world, a world that I cannot understand. When I look into the eyes of the man in the painting, I feel like he is looking at me, not through glass but through my very soul. Something in those eyes made me feel like I was being invaded, as if there was no way out. Suddenly, a small noise rang out from behind me. I turned around, but saw nothing but darkness. However, the feeling of stuffiness and tension in the air still did not decrease. I started to panic. How can I get rid of this feeling? How can I live in a house where everything can turn into a nightmare? The stuffy feeling in the air did not lessen. With every step I took closer to the painting, my heart beat faster, and the air seemed to become thicker. I clearly felt something invisible surrounding me, making it impossible for me to breathe easily. My eyes were glued to the eyes of the man in the painting, but this time I couldn't look any longer. It felt like he was seeing right through me, like he knew everything on my mind, every thought, every fear. I turned my back and hurriedly walked away, but my steps could not leave the room. An invisible force seemed to be pulling me back, and I felt like my heart was about to explode in my chest. I stood there, trying to breathe, but the air in the room felt like it was squeezing me. Suddenly, I heard a noise, a strange and distinct sound. It wasn't someone's voice, but a low hissing sound, like a string being pulled taut. A feeling of fear rose within me, and I turned to look. At first, I didn't see anything. But as the light from the living room lamp flickered across the painting, I noticed something strange. The painting is moving. Not moving in a normal way, but as if an invisible force was pushing it. Just a little, but it has clearly moved, deviating at a larger angle than before. The eyes of the man in the painting still followed me, but now, they seemed to be drawing me into a dark and gloomy world. I can't bear it anymore. Every cell in my body seemed to want to run away from here, but I still stood motionless, unable to walk. Suddenly, a stronger sound rang out in the room, this time a gentle knock on the wall. My heart sank, and I rushed out of the living room, panting as if I had just escaped a nightmare. My legs were shaking, and I don't know how I ran out of the room. I rushed into the bedroom, slammed the door and tried to catch my breath. Part of me still can't explain what just happened. I felt that presence, felt it so strongly that it felt like it wanted to take me over. That feeling still sticks with me, I can't get rid of it. I sat in the dark, not daring to turn on the light, not daring to step out of the room. My eyes were still closed, but I could feel the darkness enveloping everything around me. I don't know how much time has passed, but everything inside me seems to be in a state of extreme tension. I didn't sleep, just sat there, not daring to move. I felt an invisible force that seemed to be squeezing me, as if it wanted me to continue living in this fear forever. When I finally decided to step out of the bedroom, I saw that the darkness in the hallway was no longer the same. It became thicker, as if something was silently observing me from the dark. The painting in the living room was still there, but this time I felt like I couldn't avoid it anymore. It was pulling me into a world I couldn't understand. It is not an ordinary picture. It contained a power that I could not resist. Even though I didn't want to, I felt like an invisible force was pulling me back into the living room, closer to the painting. I felt like my steps didn't belong to me anymore, as if there was an irresistible urge leading me there. The eyes of the man in the painting still followed me, and this time I clearly felt that they wanted me to come closer, to look deeper into them. My steps became heavy, as if an invisible weight was keeping me from moving. It felt like I was no longer in control of my body, as if the painting was drawing me towards it. Every step I took became more difficult, and the tension in my chest grew. When I stood before the painting, I felt a change. It felt like the space around me changed. The painting was no longer just an object but seemed to be living, breathing, with an invisible force pulling me into it. The man's eyes in the painting seemed brighter, as if smiling, waiting for me to come closer. Part of me was still trying to resist this, but another part wanted to step closer, as if there was an irresistible urge. I felt my body being drawn into it, like an invisible force was pulling me into the gaze of the man in the painting. At this point, I no longer dare to call this a misunderstanding. I know that this painting, this hallway, everything in this house has something strange, that I cannot explain. And the scariest thing is the feeling that I can't escape it. When I walked into the storage room and saw the painting come back, my heart stopped beating. I stood there, my body stiff, unable to take my eyes off the painting. The eyes of the man in the painting, although not visible through the glass, seemed to be looking straight at me, through me. I told myself that I couldn't possibly be that obsessed. This is just a coincidence, just my imagination. But at that moment, I realized that I couldn't explain why the painting was facing the door. Feelings of insecurity and tension welled up in my body. I feel like there is an invisible force occupying this space. Part of me didn't want to believe what my eyes saw, but another part insisted that something was wrong. The painting is not just a work of art. It's controlling me, making me feel like I can't escape it. Cold sweat ran down my forehead as I continued to look at the painting. The eyes of the man in the painting seemed to have changed, no longer expressionless, but now with a strong expression, as if he was alive, waiting for me to do something, something I couldn't understand. A terrible feeling of fear swept over me, making me unable to move. I wanted to turn away, but my feet felt like they were nailed to the spot. What should I do? What should I do to get rid of this? Finally, I backed away, quickly leaving the storage room. The door closed with a loud click, as a reminder that I could not escape this darkness, no matter how hard I tried. I returned to the bedroom, but the feeling of not being able to dispel the tension and threat still haunted me. As I lay down on the bed, I felt the air around me heavier than ever, as if the walls of the room were pressing down on me. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I feel the look of the man in the painting, his eyes still following me, never looking away. I even felt something moving in the darkness, as if there was a silhouette passing by, standing behind me, observing my every move. The nightmare did not let me go. I just lay still in bed, not daring to move. The feeling of being watched cannot be dismissed. It's hard to believe that a painting can have such an impact on my mind. The next morning, when the last sunlight illuminated the room, I felt like I had been stretched out in darkness all night. Tired and exhausted, I decided to face this again. I needed to find the truth, needed to resolve this strange feeling, even if I had to face my own fears. But when I walked into the storage room to take out the painting, I couldn't believe what my eyes saw. The painting doesn't just turn around and look straight at the door. It moved, and this time, not just at an angle but completely turned towards me, as if the man in the painting was standing right in front of me, watching me from a very close distance. His eyes were not just a reflection of mine, but a menacing look, as if he was drawing me into his world. My heart was beating so hard that I felt every beat in my hands and neck. I tried not to let fear take over, but I couldn't. My breathing became rapid. I can't stop. I felt my body being pulled towards the painting, as if an invisible force was leading me, something I couldn't resist. Are not. I screamed, startled, and ran out of the room, closing the door behind me. I couldn't let it take me. I couldn't let myself be pushed into a world I couldn't escape. But no matter how hard I tried to hide, I knew that the painting was not an ordinary object. It has some power, something scary, inexplicable. And I understand that no matter how much I run, I won't be able to escape it. What is going on in this house is not a coincidence. They were signs of something darker, something lurking, waiting for its chance to take me over completely. The next day, I couldn't calm down. What happened last night still haunts me, and every time I think of the picture, my body trembles. I tried to convince myself that I was being paranoid, but every time I looked into the living room, I felt the gaze of the man in the painting. Those eyes couldn't escape me. It was as if they were sucking my mind, making it impossible for me to escape. I decided to do something. I can't live like this forever, in this confusion and fear. However, when I look around my house, I feel like everything is changing. This house is no longer a place where I feel safe. It became a trap, where everything was silently changing, and I couldn't explain why. I began to prepare myself to get rid of the painting. I know that if I don't do something, I will never be at peace. But every time I thought about throwing it away, a strange feeling arose in my heart, as if something was stopping me, making it impossible for me to make that decision. It felt like the painting was calling to me, as if it could influence my mind and force me to do what it wanted. And then, one night, when I could hardly stand it anymore, I decided to face this fear one last time. I have to break this obsession. I cannot live in the shadow of the painting forever. Trying to clear my mind of anxiety, I returned to the storage room. The door opened with a creaking sound as if a warning. The painting is still there, but this time, it's more than just a decoration. It became a living thing, something that could understand me, something that could control my thoughts. Entering the room, I immediately felt a difference in the atmosphere. It was dense, as if an invisible gravitational force was pulling me closer. Cold sweat trickled down my temples. I walked closer to the painting, but didn't dare touch it. I just stood there, looking into the man's eyes, and felt my heart clench. That feeling once again overwhelmed me. Those eyes seemed to not only look at me but also penetrate deep into my soul, invading my every thought. A thought suddenly flashed through my mind. Was I being controlled by something, some invisible force hidden in the painting? Or is this just a psychological game I have created for myself? Questions kept lingering in my head, with no answers. I stood there, facing the truth that I couldn't continue to hide. This fear has possessed me for so long. Once again, I felt an invisible force forcing me to touch the painting, to leave my fear and face it. But I can't. My hands trembled, not daring to touch the painting, even though I knew I had to. Finally, I raised my hand and grabbed the picture frame. When my finger touched the wood, a strange cold feeling spread from my finger, as if something different existed inside this painting. A small noise rang out, like a slight hissing sound, but not from the painting but from the very air around me. Suddenly, everything in the room changed. The air felt thick, as if an unbearable pressure was pressing down on me. My heart was pounding, not because of fear but because of that strange presence that enveloped me. I couldn't breathe, as if some force was gripping my throat. I turned my head and saw my own shadow reflected in the glass window, but it wasn't the same as usual. It was blurry, off-center, as if I wasn't in my right place. That's not my image anymore. It was something different, something completely foreign, and I knew for sure that I couldn't escape it. My eyes were spinning. I started to feel like I was losing control, no longer sure of what I was seeing. The image in the mirror kept changing, constantly deforming, as if there was an invisible force controlling everything. I turned around, stared at the painting, and this time, I realized the scariest thing. A painting is not just a painting. It was a door, an entrance to another world, a world I couldn't understand. And I can't back out either. I'm too deep into it. Ethan stood in the storage room, facing the painting, feeling like he was lost in a nightmare with no way out. The air in the room became stuffy, and he felt an invisible pressure covering his body. Every step he took seemed to become heavy, as if an invisible force was pulling him closer to the painting. He couldn't explain why, but it seemed like there was something deep in his soul urging him to not be able to stop, unable to escape this strange pull. His hands trembled as he continued to hold the picture frame tightly, his body tensed, his legs unable to move. The feeling of being watched did not stop, and he could feel the eyes of the man in the painting, looking not only at him but also into his soul, penetrating his every thought. That man's eyes were not just a part of the painting, but a presence, an invisible force that controlled him. He wanted to scream, wanted to throw away the painting, but his hands couldn't leave it. In the long silence, Ethan felt like he was trapped in a spiral of fear and doubt. For too long he had lived in the shadow of these strange phenomena, and now, that picture seemed to be the only way out of all his fears. But how to get free? A thought flashed in his mind: if I touch it, will it be possible to break this curse? But that is an impossible question to answer. He wondered if he was still in control of the situation, or if everything he was experiencing was just a mind game. He felt like he was standing between the thin line of reality and another world that he couldn't explain. But, what would happen if he did nothing? Will this fear continue to engulf him, or will there be a chance to escape? Unable to stand still any longer, Ethan forced himself to act. He began to regain composure, took deep breaths, trying to get rid of all anxious thoughts. A part of him insisted that if he didn't face this fear, he would never get out. He cannot continue to live in this obsession forever. Trying to concentrate, he decided to throw away all reason, all doubt, and move closer to the painting. When his hand touched the picture frame for the second time, a sharp pain suddenly shot up his arm, like an electric current running through his body. His heart was pounding, not from fear, but from the tension in his body, as if something invisible was fighting him. Just as he continued to hold the picture frame tightly, a blinding light suddenly emanated from the painting, a light so strong that it made him close his eyes tightly. A rumbling sound filled the air, as if the whole room was shaking. Ethan backed away, but not in time. He felt himself being caught in a cold wind, as if the space was changing, twisting around him. When he opened his eyes, everything seemed to disappear. The storage room was no longer a place where he stood, but a large and dark space with no way out. The walls seemed to disappear, giving way to an extremely dark space, with flickering lights appearing in the air. Ethan could no longer see the painting, only shadowy shadows floating around him, making him feel like he was trapped in another dimension. In this space, he could feel the presence of something greater, an irresistible force. All sounds disappeared, leaving only the sound of his own breathing, heavy and hurried. The eyes of the man in the painting seemed to have followed him here, still watching him from the darkness. There's nowhere to run away. There is no way out. This is what I have to deal with. Ethan wondered, as a feeling of despair began to take over his mind. Suddenly, a noise broke the silence. Ethan turned and saw a shadow flit across the space, a silhouette that looked like the man in the painting. But it's not like him anymore. It seemed taller, dimmer, as if made of darkness. And when it looked towards Ethan, its eyes lit up in a terrifying way, not the eyes of the man in the painting, but a cold, emotionless light. A terrible cold feeling ran down his spine. He couldn't breathe, his heart was beating so hard it felt like it was about to burst in his chest. The road in front of him had no exit, no way out. He knew that once he entered this world, he couldn't go back. But another thought flashed in his mind. If he couldn't go back, at least he had to face it. You can't live in fear forever. You've come too far, and now it's time to fight. Ethan took a deep breath, regaining control of his breathing. His eyes were no longer looking at the darkness, but at the eyes staring back at him. And in that moment, he understood that there was only one way to escape this control, to face it, accept its presence and not allow it to take over. He walked forward, step by step, towards that darkness. This time, he didn't feel scared anymore. Instead, he felt like he was entering an inevitable war, but this war was his own. Ethan walked toward the darkness, step by step, as if he were entering a space from which he could never escape. Every step made his heart pound harder, not from fear, but from the deep realization that he couldn't go back. What is waiting for him ahead is not safety but facing the fears in his soul. The space around him has no escape. The walls, the doors, all seemed to disappear in the thick, dark air. Faint shadows still floated around, and the feeling that something invisible was watching him from the darkness made it impossible for him to breathe. The light from the painting had gone out, but its presence still weighed heavily on him. Ethan tried to control himself, telling himself that this was not a nightmare. This is the world he has entered, and if he does not face it, he will forever be trapped in this fear. He stopped in the middle of the dark space and noticed a large dark shadow moving towards him. It was not the man in the picture, but there was a frightening resemblance. That black shadow was huge in size, a blurry shape, with no clear features, only eyes that glowed like deadly flames. Ethan felt an invisible force pulling him closer. But he couldn't stop. He decided to face it, no matter what. I can't live in this fear forever. No, Ethan whispered, talking to himself. I'm not afraid. I can't be afraid anymore. A strong hiss rang through the air as the shadow came closer. The light from its eyes grew brighter and brighter, illuminating the entire surrounding space. A whisper echoed in Ethan's head, and he could feel the words coming not from the shadow's lips, but from deep within his mind. Run, Ethan. You can't escape it. You belong here already. That whisper was like a sharp arrow piercing straight into his soul. But this time, Ethan did not back down. He stood straight, his eyes no longer panicked but filled with determination. No, he said firmly. I won't let you control me anymore. At that moment, the surrounding space began to change. The shadowy shadows began to dissipate, and the light from the painting seemed to return, faint but visible. Ethan felt like he had broken an invisible hold, and from the darkness, he saw a small escape route emerging. The dark figure's eyes lit up again, as if it was laughing at him. But this time, Ethan didn't feel scared. He walked towards that light, not looking back. He knew that if he kept walking, he would escape its shadow. When he passed through the exit, the space around him returned to normal. Familiar hallway, familiar house. But that feeling is no longer suffocation, but freedom. He stood in the hallway, no longer feeling the strange presence. The look of the man in the painting no longer haunted him. Ethan breathed a sigh of relief. I got over it. He defeated himself. Even though the light in the house had returned to normal, the strange feelings had not completely disappeared. Ethan no longer felt like he was being watched, but part of him still felt something remaining, something inexplicable. He looked around the room. The house seemed peaceful now, but his mind couldn't escape the heaviness of what had just happened. He has passed through a great challenge, but is it really the end? Will the change in space and those shadows return? As he walked down the hallway, his feet remained light, no longer feeling tense or being watched. But every time his gaze glanced over the walls, he felt a strange feeling, as if something was lurking, just waiting for a chance to return. He knew he had faced his fear and conquered it, but the anxiety still could not be completely shaken off. One evening, while sitting in the living room, Ethan noticed that everything seemed strangely peaceful. No strange noises, no feeling of being watched. The house seemed to have calmed down after the dark waves it had gone through. He sighed, finally able to relax after many stressful days. But suddenly, he heard a small noise. A hiss, soft but enough to startle him. Not from somewhere far away, but from this very room, from the very place where he sat. His heart pounded again, but this time, he didn't feel panic. He stood up, looking around. Nothing has changed. The hissing sound came again, but this time clearer, from behind. He turned around and saw his reflection in the mirror. But the strange thing is, in that shadow, there is something else. His shadow was no longer simply a reflection. It moved gently, but it wasn't the same as usual. It was as if his darkness had a life of its own. Ethan stood still. He couldn't believe what he saw, but the feeling was the same as before. It felt like something invisible was lurking, waiting for a chance to appear. His eyes in the mirror are no longer his reflection. The light from the lamp in the living room reflected something strange, a distortion, an inexplicable presence. But then, as Ethan tried to get closer to the mirror, the darkness in the mirror began to change. The shadow, although not his, began to move again. He felt like his feet were glued to the floor. That feeling, the feeling he had felt in the dark hallway, came back again. And this time, he couldn't resist. That's enough, Ethan told himself, trying to regain his composure. I can't let it control me anymore. With one last effort, he walked to the mirror, his hands shaking but determined. He raised his hand, intending to touch the mirror, to see what would happen when he faced it. But as soon as his finger touched the mirror, a sharp pain ran down his arm, just like the last time he touched the painting. A small explosion rang out in his head, and suddenly, the space around him disappeared. Ethan opened his eyes and saw that he was no longer standing in the living room. He couldn't distinguish this space. That's not the real world. Everything around him was darkness, without shape or color. It was just him and a large black shadow, standing in front of him. It was the silhouette of the man in the painting, but this time, he was no longer a painting. He was alive, had a real presence, and his eyes were no longer just a cold gaze, but alive, full of power. Welcome to my world, his voice said, not from his lips, but as if from the depths of Ethan's mind. Ethan felt caught in a space he couldn't escape from, but he no longer felt afraid. This time, he faced it. I'm not afraid of you, he said, not knowing if he was still in control of the situation. But a part of him, a strong part, knew he had to fight. This is not just a picture, a strange world anymore. This is your fight, your own. He walked towards the shadow, step by step. Every step is a victory over the fear in my heart. You don't need to get out. You just need to face it. The shadow smirked, but this time Ethan didn't back down. He stood straight, looking straight into the eyes of the man in the dark. And as he did so, the shadow gradually disappeared into space, as if there was no longer a place to hide. After his final encounter with the dark figure in that strange space, Ethan felt a powerful change within himself. When the light returned, he no longer felt the presence of the shadows, no longer heard the strange whispering in his head. He couldn't understand why, but at this moment, the feeling of fear he had been carrying for so many days seemed to have disappeared. All that remains is silence, a strange feeling of serenity. But even so, a part of him still felt a gloom, as if the darkness was always nearby, just waiting for an opportunity to return. Ethan stood in the middle of the room. The space was normal as usual, but questions were still lingering in his mind. Have I really escaped it? Is that picture, and all that has happened, really over? Those unanswered questions still haunted him, but he was no longer so afraid. He decided to face that uncertainty, because if he didn't, he would forever be tormented by a sense of lack of control. He had put the painting in the storage room, where there had been no trace of the strange presence before, and now it no longer frightened him. Yet a part of him still felt a strange urge, as if he were avoiding something bigger, something inexplicable. Even though peace returned, an indescribable feeling still lingered in my heart. The following nights, he slept more easily, but still had strange dreams. These dreams are not about the painting, but about a dark, endless hallway. This hallway is not the hallway in his house, but another place, a strange but haunting space. He kept walking, not knowing the destination, but unable to turn back. It felt like something was chasing him, invisible but clearly present. Just like that, he kept running, but couldn't escape. One night, when he woke up in a panic, his heart pounding in his chest, he decided to check the painting one more time. He needed to make sure he hadn't just created it all in his mind. When he entered the storage room, he saw the painting still there, quietly, nothing had changed. But when he looked closely, the eyes of the man in the painting, they were looking straight at him. That feeling returned, not fear but another fear, an inexplicable urge. The eyes in the painting seemed to call out to him, and in that moment, Ethan understood that maybe what he was facing wasn't just his fear. It could be something bigger, beyond what he could understand. He walked closer to the painting, no longer feeling shaken. Instead, he felt an intense curiosity. Part of him wondered if he could truly break this curse, or if there was something holding him back, not allowing him to escape. The eyes of the man in the painting seemed to open wider, looking straight at him. He stood still, his hands trembling as he touched the picture frame. Once again, that strange power surged, but this time he didn't feel afraid. He felt that this was not a punishment or revenge. It was an invitation, a challenge that he had to face. In that moment, all Ethan felt was silence. A silence so profound that he could hear his own breathing, as if the space around him had stopped completely. He no longer felt the urge to run away. He no longer felt like he was being pursued. Ethan stood straight, looking into the eyes of the man in the painting. He could feel the challenge, and part of him understood that this was the time to come to terms with all that had happened. He couldn't continue to live in fear, couldn't live in these shadows forever. Okay, he whispered to himself, his hands tightening around the canvas. I won't let you control me anymore. And when he decisively placed the painting on the floor, everything in the room suddenly changed. The light seemed to strangely recede, not like it was extinguished, but like a door opening, leading him into another world. He couldn't fully understand what was going on, but a strange feeling of freedom rose within him. When the light finally returned, everything in the house returned to normal, but Ethan felt that he had crossed a threshold. He conquered himself, but not with fear, but with the understanding that sometimes the darkness in life is just a challenge to find his true self. Ethan turned back to look at the room, feeling a stillness he had never felt before. A strange sense of peace enveloped him, as if he had freed himself from an unknown burden. He smiled slightly, finally understanding that fear, no matter how strong, could be faced and overcome. My hands shook uncontrollably as I reached out to move the painting again. The surface of the painting felt strangely warm to my touch, and a chill shivered through me. I jerked my hand back as if burned. Even though panic was tearing at my mind, I decided to confront whatever was happening. I forced myself to sit on the warehouse floor, ignoring the tight feeling in my chest and looking straight into that painted face. I focused on the small details, the clearly drawn lines of the man's eyebrows, the shadow of the hat cutting across his face. My legs were numb and sweat was beading on my forehead. I tried to tell myself that there was no way an inanimate object could move on its own, but my heart pounded against my ribs so hard I was almost gasping for air. Finally, I took the painting outside, determined to keep as much distance between it and me as possible. I found a spot in our covered patio and let it lean its face against the outside wall. I quietly returned home, ordering myself not to look back over my shoulder. That night, I felt calmer inside. The feeling of oppression has disappeared. I even managed to sleep for a few hours without dreams, but a dull fear lingered in the back of my mind, telling me that I hadn't really solved any problems. In the early hours of the morning, I was startled awake by a new gut-wrenching sound, a gentle scraping against the wall outside. My heart beat so violently that my vision momentarily blurred. I remind myself that it could be a tree branch or an animal prowling the yard. Pulse pounding in my throat. I tiptoed through the dark house to look outside. I almost tripped when I saw the vertical painting just outside the living room window, facing inward as if it were looking through the glass. The darkness created by the outdoor lighting makes its shape look monstrous and elongated. My stomach churned with terror. I cannot breathe normally. Every time I inhale, it feels like shards of ice scrape into my lungs. Before my eyes, the wind made the painting sway slightly, creating a gentle creak as the bottom of the frame touched the brick wall. At that moment, I felt certain that some force beyond my understanding was working through the painting. My fingers were numb and my scalp tingled as if electricity was running through it. I realized I had to get rid of it at all costs. Summoning all my remaining courage, I ran outside and grabbed the painting. My hands trembled and adrenaline rushed to my limbs. I do not allow myself to hesitate. I carried it out to the car, threw it in the trunk and slammed it shut. Then I drove, ignoring the anxiety tugging at my gut, until I found a street thrift store with a donation counter. I remember getting out of the car and breathing in the humid morning air as if I had just run a marathon. My entire body felt smooth, the house no longer pressed against me with an invisible weight. I felt as if I could breathe freely again when I entered the store. As I looked into the living room, I noticed the empty space on the wall where the painting once stood, with no reminder of my recent ordeal. A trace of my paranoia. Every so often, if a light flickers unexpectedly or the walls make strange noises, I am in a crisis of quick reflexes and brace myself for my paintings to dry as I contemplate the possibility that the painting will continue its menacing vigil in some other unsuspecting living room. Even as I sit here, putting these facts into words, I feel a tremor in my hands and an increase in heart rate at every faint sound. I chalked up the impression of being watched when no one had the unmissable picture and the lingering feeling that the line between the mundane and the inexplicable was what I wanted to believe. I made myself look scary and shallow as if I was back in my old living room under that unrelenting gaze. So I hold out hope that perhaps it will remain forgotten among the dusty contributions, never to be discovered again in any normal way. But sometimes, in the deep silence before dawn, I wake up with old fears returning to me. My heart pounded at what had pulled me from sleep. In those moments, I felt a faint echo when I couldn't believe it. The front door. I felt that this old house resisted my presence. The air inside felt old, as if it had never been stirred by an occupant of one who behaved living on a wooden slab at my feet, groaning with ancient rejection. It's not simply rooms that aren't being used. Shake it off, I switched. One cold afternoon in autumn, the sky was overcast. The sun was just dark clouds. The realtor mentioned that the decades-old house required a bit of renovation, but I didn't mind that. I couldn't miss something in detail. A heaviness in the atmosphere seemed to intensify once again. I started unpacking a few days into my stay, deciding to do something I'd been avoiding for a long time, go into the attic to see if there were any leftover items from previous owners. As I walked up the worn stairs, the cramped feeling in the air was not pleasant. The attic was cold and dark, with shirts and furniture buried under a thick layer of dust. Some old benches and furniture have been neglected over the years. Even though they were filthy and the musty smell made me cover my mouth, I decided to knock down a chair. I thought it might be a unique decorative piece, adding some rustic charm to my new living room. When I placed the chair on a small table in the corner of the room near the window, I imagined it would highlight the space, albeit a bit cluttered and dated. However, the special feeling did not come immediately. Even though I tried to dust it off, smelling an almost strange chemical smell, I dismissed the feeling and tried to enjoy the feeling of having a home to myself. But despite that effort, the unsettling nature of the space never really reassured me. That Saturday, I woke up in the middle of the night, around 2 a.m., with my heart pounding in my chest. My entire bedroom, with its damp and still air, only added to the discomfort. I told myself that maybe I had forgotten to unplug the radio before going to bed. However, when I went out to the living room, I found the radio station was faint and static, with occasional strange hissing noises. The voice was distorted, so fast that I couldn't decipher it. The wave of discomfort was so great that I felt sick, felt my stomach pound against my ears, and my breathing began to choke. I went back to bed, but I couldn't sleep. My mind was tormented by that noise. These half-asleep dreams make me feel like there is something wrong in this house. The next day was gloomy, drizzle continued to fall on the old windows, and the memories of that night made it impossible for me to concentrate on work. The next morning around 2 a.m., I woke up again, my heart drenched in sweat. There was a strange feeling in the air that made me feel like everything around me was being imprisoned. The murmur of something below, a strange voice, interspersed with the sound of my breathing. Not a whisper from a nightmare, but a voice that seemed both human and inhuman. I can't remember what I was thinking, but I felt something deep inside. Perhaps I was actually facing an inexplicable phenomenon. I then disconnected the radio's power cord and stuffed it into a drawer in the kitchen, determined not to let this object torment me any further. I did everything I could to avoid it, but the next weekend it happened again. This time, I didn't wake up at 2 in the morning. Instead, I lay there, staring at the bedroom ceiling, waiting for something to happen. A few minutes after 2 o'clock, I heard the radio sound. This time, the noise was louder, as if the noise had a clear purpose and direction. I rushed out of bed, almost tripping over my own feet. By the time I reached the living room, the static had changed to a weak, monotone voice. The words were incomprehensible, stretched and distorted beyond recognition, but I felt an undeniable certainty that it was trying to communicate something special to me. That invisible wave hit me so hard that I thought I might faint. The radio was still there, in the same place I had left it, but the silence enveloped me, making it impossible to breathe. I wanted to escape, but I felt frozen adrenaline surging inside me. Trying to turn the knob on the radio, my finger touched it and a strong jolt startled me. Distorted voices, fragments of sound tearing through the space. The feeling was so surreal, it made me doubt my sanity. I began to doubt whether these things were a product of my mind, partly distorted by fear. I quickly went downstairs, checking every light switch along the way, but when I got to the living room, there was no radio station there. But the silence continued, to the point that my skin got goosebumps. There was no sound, only silence, filling the house. I gasped, feeling like something invisible, was still here, watching me. Not a vicious cycle of thoughts, but a physical sensation, the presence of something I couldn't see, but could clearly feel. Finally, the sun rose. I realized I couldn't live like this. Radio is not just an item anymore, it is a magnet for something that I cannot explain. My mind was affected, I was clear under its influence. With final determination, I knew I had to cut it out of my life completely. As I looked back at the house, I realized that everything I did, hiding, getting rid of, trying to forget, could not erase the truth. Something strange and inexplicable was driving all of these events. I started unpacking a few days into my stay, deciding to venture into the attic to check out old items left over from previous owners. The attic was dark and the musty smell hit my nose as soon as I stepped up. Old shirts were scattered around and a few old benches. Even though it was dirty, I couldn't resist bringing a chair down. I thought maybe it would be a unique decoration, adding a bit of rustic charm to my living room. I placed it on a small table in the corner of the room near the window. The feel of it wasn't one of perfection, but there was a specialness in the air. The curtains that I had worked so hard to close seemed to blend in with it. I recall a strange chemical smell around the chair, but I just tried to ignore it and enjoy the feeling of having this house to myself. However, the feeling of insecurity about this space is always there, an underlying feeling of anxiety that has never let me go. That night, around 2 a.m., I woke up with my heart pounding in my chest, my body heavy with unprecedented anxiety. The room was quiet, the silence seemed to increase, making the atmosphere even more oppressive. I told myself that I must have forgotten to unplug the radio before going to bed, but I couldn't be sure. When I entered the living room, I saw a faint radio station, filled with static, the occasional distorted speech. The voice was so fast that I couldn't understand it, and I felt a wave of discomfort spread through my body, making me nauseous. The feeling was very real, as if I was being attacked by something invisible. I went back to bed, but couldn't sleep. Strange dreams kept circling in my head. That feeling stuck with me like an open wound that couldn't be healed. The next day, as the drizzle continued to fall outside the window, I felt an overwhelming depression. But I couldn't forget the memory of the night before. I tried to focus on work, but my mind was still dominated by the feeling of not being able to escape something I didn't understand. Again, around 2 a.m. the next morning, I woke up with my heart pounding in my chest and drenched in sweat. This time, there was not just a feeling of anxiety but also a heaviness in the air, as if something was taking up space. I heard murmuring, strange whispers just below my breath. The voice wasn't from a nightmare, it seemed to come from somewhere very close, but indistinct. A voice that sounded human, but was distinct, unidentifiable. Although I can't remember exactly what I was thinking at the time, I felt something very real was happening. I quickly disconnected the radio's power cord and stuffed it into a drawer in the kitchen, determined not to let that object torment me anymore. The next day passed in relative silence. The house didn't have any strange noises, but the feeling of anxiety still couldn't leave me. I couldn't rest easily, and every sudden noise startled me. On the weekend, at around 2 a.m. like before, I heard the radio sound again. This time, the noise was louder, as if it had a purpose, a clear direction. I rushed out of bed, almost tripping over my own feet. By the time I reached the living room, the static had changed to a weak, monotone voice. The words were incomprehensible, drawn out and distorted, but I clearly felt that it was trying to communicate something special to me. My heart was pounding so hard, it felt like I might faint. The radio remained where I left it, but this time, I couldn't stand still. I have to do something. I turned around and turned on the light. Bright lights illuminated the living room again, but nothing had changed. The radio went silent. But I felt something strange, an invisible presence was still there. The shadows in the room, my gaze, everything seemed to be watching me. I can feel every bit of it, even though I turned off all the lights, and the shadow is still there. I started unpacking a few days into my stay. I ventured into the attic to see if there were any items left over from the previous owners. The attic was dark, dusty, and had a strong smell of mold when I entered. Thrown away shirts and a few benches were buried in piles of old furniture. Even though it was dirty and had an unpleasant musty smell, I still decided to bring a chair down. I thought it could be a unique decoration, adding some rustic charm to my new living room. When I placed it on a small table in the corner of the room near the window, I tried to imagine how it would accentuate the space. However, the special feeling I expected did not come immediately. Even though I dusted myself off and tried to ignore the strange chemical smell, the air in the room was still heavy, as if something was lurking. Even though I told myself that I had a house of my own, that space still made me uneasy. One Saturday night, I woke up around 2 a.m., my heart pounding in my chest. The entire bedroom became more stuffy, the air seemed thick and heavy. I tried to convince myself that maybe I had forgotten to unplug the radio before going to bed, but I couldn't be sure of that. When I went out to the living room, I saw that the radio was emitting static, sometimes strange sounds, words distorted so quickly that I couldn't understand them. The wave of discomfort hit me so hard that I felt like my stomach was tight and my head was spinning. I tried to go back to bed, but couldn't sleep. Strange dreams continued to confuse me. The next day, as the drizzle continued to fall on the windows, I felt an unending anxiety. Memories of that voice kept echoing in my head, making it impossible for me to concentrate on work. Once again, at around 2 a.m., I woke up, my heart beating loudly and sweat drenching my body. This feeling is very strange, like the air in the room has been sucked out of oxygen, making it difficult for me to breathe. Beneath my breath, I heard a strange murmur. It was like a voice, both human and inhuman. Not a nightmare, but it felt inescapable. I can't remember clearly what I was thinking at that moment, but it felt as if I was facing something truly beyond my understanding. Determined to put an end to it, I disconnected the radio's power cord and placed it in a drawer in the kitchen, telling myself that I couldn't let it continue to dominate my life. The next time passed in relative silence. The house didn't have any strange noises, but my mind still couldn't be at peace. A week later, at about 2 a.m. like before, I heard the radio ring again. This time, the noise was louder, as if there was a clear purpose and direction. I hurried out of bed, nearly tripping over my own feet as I ran to the living room. The noise turned into a weak, monotone voice, with words that were incomprehensible, but I clearly felt that something was trying to communicate to me. That voice hit me so hard, it made me feel like I was going to faint. The radio was still there, right where I had left it, but I couldn't sit still. I have to do something. I turned around and turned on the light, but nothing changed. The radio went silent. Silence continued to permeate the house, and although I tried to find a reason for these strange events, a feeling of unease still enveloped me. This time, I couldn't push away the feeling that something, an invisible presence, was staying in this space. I remember every little detail from that night because there was something about the silence that felt as vivid as the silence in the woods right before something burst out of the darkness. The chairs in the waiting room were empty and lined up neatly, looking almost like silent witnesses to something I couldn't see. The smell of disinfectant was strong and the heating fan emitted a burning smell and a monotonous humming sound. That hum should have been comforting, but instead it was like an out-of-tune orchestra constantly reminding me of how lonely I was. From the hallway leading deep into the clinic, a flickering light caught my eye. It's subtle, just a gentle stutter in the fluorescent lights overhead. But at night, in a place designed to be sterile and controlled, every unpredictable flicker of light strikes me as a sign that things are out of balance. I stood up from my seat and took a few steps toward the hallway. My chest tightened as if there was an invisible string pressed around my ribs. Every breath was a little labored and my heartbeat was pounding in my ears. I could see the hallway extending all the way to the back, where it branched into the emergency room and operating room. The overhead lights cast a harsh light on the floor, but at the edges of my vision, everything seemed flickering and out of focus, as if looking through heat waves on a scorching sidewalk. There's something about this hallway that always annoys me. So many closed doors, so many corners that a person can disappear from sight. Usually it's bustling with staff and patients, but tonight, it's as quiet as a crypt. I withdrew my gaze and turned back to the reception desk, determined not to let my imagination run wild. As time passed, I shuffled papers, trying to stay busy. But every now and then I thought I saw a shadow moving along the edge of the hallway, darting out of sight. The moment I looked up, my heart skipped a beat, making me feel empty in my stomach. I reasoned to myself that it could just be fluorescent tubes buzzing or reflecting my own movements. Still, the subtle waves of anxiety continued to rise, and I felt my throat dry up, making it difficult to swallow. Then, without warning, a loud crash rang out from the emergency hallway. It sounded like a door being slammed with incredible force and then another slam, and another. Each blow echoed through the walls. My breath made my pulse pound and for a moment my mind went blank. I listened nervously, convincing myself it was the wind or maybe another employee was moving things around. But the noise was too rhythmic, too deliberate. Each door slammed shut in a strange sequence. I jumped up from the chair, adrenaline ripping through my veins. The hallway lights flickered more intensely. Now, the overhead lamp was returning to the reception, stuttering as if it might die at any moment. I rushed into the hallway, half expecting to see someone banging on the door in anger. But as soon as I walked around the corner of the hallway, a silence fell. Not a single door opened. The hallway was empty and all the doors were closed. My neck tingled and a cold sweat ran down my spine. I tried to steady my breathing as I moved forward, checking each door. Tension shot through my body. I thought about calling Dr. Caldwell, but something in my mind held me back. Maybe I don't want to appear erratic or incompetent. I still can't ignore the beating of my heart. The hallway led to the exam room and I forced myself to open each door to check. Flickering fluorescent lights painted everything in a harsh glare, making shadows sway and dance. Every room was deserted and all the windows were tightly locked. The air became thick, as if each breath required extra effort. My stomach turned at the thought that I might have been alone when I heard these noises. Is my mind playing tricks on me? My hands clenched on the doorknob, which was slick with sweat, and I had to squeeze them to hold on. After what seemed like an eternity, I returned to the reception area. The tension in my chest still coiled like a spring. Just as I was about to sit down, the slamming sound started. It was so loud that the pictures on the wall shook and I felt the reception desk vibrate on my hips. Everything around seemed to come alive, as if this house had a soul of its own, something gnawing at the quietly following my every step. My nerves were tense, I almost jumped out of my skin with that repeated tum-tum attack. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would tear my chest apart. This time, I ran back down the hallway faster and called out to see if anyone was there. There was no response, but when I reached the hallway, the noise was dead silent. Nothing out of the ordinary. A chill spread down to the base of his skull and goosebumps spread across his arms. My breathing became ragged and my throat was so dry that I wanted to swallow but couldn't. I tried to calm myself down, telling myself that I was just imagining it, but the fear grew stronger. I remembered Dr. Caldwell was still behind, so I hurried toward the operating room. I saw him meticulously cleaning the tools. He looked up in surprise when he saw how excited I was, and he asked in a monotone voice, "What's going on?" I explained that I heard the door slamming repeatedly. He shook his head. He didn't hear anything. According to him, the back was completely quiet, with only the normal hum of machinery. That didn't calm my racing heartbeat at all. I could barely get the words out, but he seemed to notice the roof of my mouth and suggested I take a moment to breathe. He patted my shoulder and continued his work, seemingly undisturbed. When I returned to the front, the feeling of isolation became even stronger. The lights flickered again, causing shadows to stutter across the walls. I tried to bury my anxiety in basic tasks like organizing paperwork and rearranging pet care brochures, but my mind refused to focus. The sound of paper rustling. Every sound of my shoes on the floor was like an electric current running through my body. Every nerve in my body was on high alert, as if expecting another violent collision at any moment. I decided to check outside. Maybe I thought there was a gust of wind or a gutter of liquid water pounding against the doors. Stepping out the double glass doors, I found the parking lot empty except for my car and Dr. Caldwell's. Street lights flickered overhead, throwing beams of sickly yellow light across the asphalt. A cold breeze blew past me, but it certainly wasn't strong enough to slam the heavy doors. I stood there for a moment, looking around the perimeter. The clinic was located in a quiet block and at that hour there was no one around. However, I couldn't shake the strange feeling, the feeling of being watched. My eyes darted to the darkness lurking near the trash can in the corner of the lot. The wind blew a plastic bag across the ground, making a faint jingling sound that made me grit my teeth. Everything was normal, but I felt like I was walking through a dream where the surroundings only pretended to be normal. A weight settled on my shoulders, as if the very atmosphere wanted me to feel vulnerable. I forced myself back inside, closing the door behind me and double-checking that the lock was secure. The reception area looks different now, somehow dimmed. The overhead lights were still bright, but they felt muted, like the color had been drained from the world. My hands were shaking a bit, so I rubbed them together to create warmth. but my palms were still clammy. It didn't help the animals in the kennels behind the operating room, who were eerily silent. Not a single bark or meow. I find that unnatural. Often at night, even the most docile pets make whimpering or shuffling sounds. Their silence was like an omen, as if they sensed something. I can't understand it all. My heartbeat increased as I thought about how all those creatures remained completely still and silent. Another sudden noise broke my chain of thoughts. This time, it wasn't so much a slam as a series of thuds along the wall. Each thud felt closer, as if something were moving down the hallway, hitting the walls as it passed. Cold sweat ran down the back of my neck. I could almost picture the shape of a figure lurking in the hallway unseen. My throat tightened and I found myself whispering under my breath a meaningless reassurance that everything was okay when I knew it wasn't. My heart felt like it was about to explode. I forced myself to approach the hallway again. The lights flickered in a frenzied fashion, bathing the walls in alternating pulses of light and darkness. My body trembled from head to toe and I could feel my lips dry and chapped. I walked towards the hallway, my hand trembling as I touched the doorknob. The thud still echoed in my head, getting closer and closer. It felt like there was something waiting for me in the darkness, and I didn't know if I had the courage to face it. My temples ached as tension took over my entire body. I stopped in the doorway, bracing myself for the unbelievable sight of those doors slamming again or the walls echoing. I stood there, breathing hard, straining to hear anything, but only the loud sound of my own pulse. The hallway was silent again, like a heavy trap. I hesitated, feeling almost dizzy, and clung to the wall to keep my balance. The hallway seemed to stretch longer than usual, as if the geometry had shifted into an endless path. A wave of nausea rose in my stomach, twisted with primal fear. Suddenly, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. A door that I was sure was closed is now ajar. It was a small supply room. My scalp tingled and I had an uneasy feeling, as if I looked directly at that door, something would look back at me. My skin itched, and I forced myself to step forward. My legs felt stiff as if I were moving through thick mud. Each step brought with it a rush of adrenaline that made my hands shake uncontrollably. Arriving at the supply room, I placed my hand on the door. The cold surface is almost sticky. My breathing became ragged and ragged. I pushed the door open and found nothing but shelves of sanitary napkins and spare blankets. However, the air inside that small space felt stuffy, thick with tension. My eyes scanned the shelves for signs of disturbance, but everything looked orderly. The feeling of being watched still persisted, as if there was a ghost hovering right behind me. I backed out of the room, my heart pounding so violently that it was almost deafening. I closed the door gently, but the sound of the latch echoed in my ears like thunder. That's when I felt I had to find Dr. Caldwell and ask him to verify that I wasn't insane. I practically ran down the hallway to the operating room. I saw him completing the procedure he was doing calmly as always. He looked at me, worry written all over his face, and asked if I was okay. I tried to explain those noises, how many times they happened. I felt something wandering in the hallway. He seemed confused that he hadn't heard anything. He offered to accompany me to the reception area. We walked through the hallway together. He checked each room for signs of intrusion. Are not. No slamming, no flashing, not even a hiss. The hallway was as harmless as a school hallway under bright fluorescent lights. The only sound was our footsteps. We got to the front and he left me at the table, telling me to call him if it happened again. His reassurance was hollow and I could see my own fear reflected in his wide eyes. He tried to stay calm, but I could feel my pale face and shaking hands confusing him. Left alone again, I walked back behind the desk. Muscles are tense. The entire clinic felt claustrophobic, as if the walls could close in at any moment. The lights flickered back, but now they were more subtle, as if dancing right at the edge of my peripheral vision. My eyelids felt gritty and my heart rate never fully returned to its normal rhythm. The silence in the waiting room pressed against my ears, turning every little noise into an ominous event. Then comes the final climax. A series of violent doors suddenly slammed shut one after another, erupting from the back of the clinic to the reception area. It was like a roar of thunder. Each impact occurred. Eventually the floor shook under my feet. My breath caught and a wave of terror washed over me, so intense that I almost buckled my knees. However, just as I mustered up the courage to rush towards the hallway, the pounding stopped. Complete and utter silence followed, broken only by the frantic pounding in his chest. I stood there, half expecting something to burst out of the hallway. I could feel small beads of sweat along my forehead and my vision was blurring at the edges. Nothing appeared. After what seemed like an eternity, Dr. Caldwell returned to the front to finish his shift. He saw that I was pale and drenched in sweat. My pulse is still pounding. He asked what was going on, but I couldn't find the words. My mouth felt like sandpaper and I could barely get an explanation out. At that moment, silence fell again. There was no howling wind, no creaking doors, no flashing lights. Even the suffocating feeling seemed to recede as if something had decided to leave as quickly as it had come. Dr. Caldwell looked around confused. He looked around, but saw nothing. Dr. Caldwell looked at me with confusion, a flash of concern in his eyes, but no sign of fear, even though I knew I was seeing fear reflected in my wide eyes. "Just call me if you need me," he said, trying to stay calm, but I could sense the uncertainty in his voice. I stood there, half surprised, half confused, not knowing if I could believe what I had just experienced. The feeling of fear never left me. It kept wrapping around me, increasing every hour. I couldn't separate myself from the images of slamming doors and strange figures lurking in the dark hallways. Every time the lights flickered, every time I heard a small noise in the clinic, my heart jumped in my chest. Then, when Dr. Caldwell returned to the operating room, I returned to the reception area. The feeling of suffocation continued to haunt me. The overhead fluorescent light was still on, but it was dim, as if the space had been drained of energy. Everything seemed covered in a layer of opacity, as if I was living in a nightmare that would never end. I sat down in my chair, trying to concentrate on my work, but my mind couldn't stop thinking about the strange events that had happened. My eyes scanned the shadows in the clinic, vaguely sensing things that couldn't be seen. My heart pounded every time I heard my feet on the floor, every time a door accidentally creaked. Suddenly, another noise rang out from behind. A powerful thud, like something hitting a wall. I turned around, my heart skipped a beat. The shadows in the hallway seemed to be calling me. A strange feeling spread throughout my body. I stood up, my legs heavy, and walked toward the hallway where I heard the noise. My steps seemed to last forever. Each step seemed to be pulled back, blocked by an invisible force. Another thud. This time, it was closer, as if something was moving behind me. I couldn't breathe, my throat was tight. I tried to walk faster, but my feet felt glued to the floor. As I approached the operating room, I felt something menacing from the darkness. The overhead lights now flickered strongly again, as if they were confused, unable to decide whether they should light up or not. When I returned to the operating room, Dr. Caldwell was preparing to clean up the instruments. He looked at me for a moment then asked, "What's wrong? Are you okay?" I tried to say what was happening, but the words wouldn't leave my throat. The feeling of being watched, the thick tension in the air, all made it impossible for me to say those words. In the end, I could only shake my head, not knowing what to do. Dr. Caldwell patted my shoulder again, as if trying to reassure me. "Just relax. Don't worry so much," he said, but the urgency in his voice made me sense that something was wrong. I looked at him, and a cold feeling ran down my spine. I can't explain it, but I know I can't stay here much longer. I left the operating room, and as I walked through the hallway, the doors slammed shut again. This time, it wasn't a random noise. It was really strong, fierce, and it hit me like a fatal blow. I rushed towards the front door, barely able to breathe, feeling overwhelmed with fear, and I couldn't run fast enough. I felt something chasing me, and whether I turned around or not, I knew it was approaching. Every step I take is as if an invisible hand is pushing me forward, pushing me away from this place. But I know, even if I leave, I will never escape those closed doors or those eerie sounds. Images of shadows, thuds, doors slamming will still follow me, chasing me all my life. Walking down the stairs, I couldn't help but feel that every step I took added to the tension in the air. The atmosphere seemed thicker, and I couldn't help but feel as if I were moving deeper into an invisible trap, something invisible but definitely watching me. When I got to the back door, the sound of wind rustled again, but this time there was nothing normal about it. It's not the sound of the wind gently blowing through the leaves or blowing through the rotten wooden planks of the yard. This was another sound, dense, powerful, as if something physical was moving through the air. Despite all my caution, I stepped outside again, into the darkness, where the moonlight only illuminated a small part of the yard. Old wooden tables stacked on top of each other, creating strange shapes like ghosts of old and forgotten objects. The silence of the space made me feel even more alone, as if I was the only person left in a world that had stopped spinning. And then I saw them. Footprint. Again, I saw them on the wet ground near the fence, as strange, elongated indentations. These footprints are much larger than mine. They were shaped like a human foot, but unlike any I had ever seen. Wider and longer, and especially, there is no trace of a shoe. They had clear outlines, as if someone, or something, was walking across the yard that I couldn't see. A cold feeling ran down my spine as I knelt closer, trying to get a closer look. Cold sweat began to roll down my temples. These footprints continued across the yard, circling around old wooden tables, then suddenly disappeared without any further tracks, with no indication of where they went. My limbs are weak. A feeling of fear spread through my body, making it almost impossible to move. I tried to breathe but couldn't. My heart was pounding, every beat felt like it was about to rip out my chest. I stood up with difficulty and walked back into the house, closing the door behind me. This time, the lock wasn't strong, and my hands were shaking so much that it took 3 tries to lock the door. I wonder, could I have heard wrong? Could I have imagined that footprint? My mind whirled with hundreds of possibilities. Someone may have jumped over the fence, but then disappeared into the night. Or maybe they have a key to some entrance I don't know about. However, no explanation made me feel at ease. Those footprints, they were so big, and they disappeared without leaving any traces on the wall or fence. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, images of those footprints appear in my mind. A sudden feeling of fear hit me, waking me up, my hands were wet with sweat. I couldn't quell the anxiety in my heart, it felt like someone was there, in the darkness, waiting for me. The next morning, when I walked out, my mind was still tense, unable to forget those footprints. The bar owner mentioned that he didn't install cameras around the yard because he didn't think there was anything to worry about. I noticed that he frowned slightly when he heard me talk about the footprints. He asked me if I was sure it wasn't an animal rummaging around, but I just shook my head, not wanting to say more. However, his eyes made me think that he was also suspicious of something, even if he didn't say it. Many nights passed without anything unusual happening. The footprints were gone, and I was starting to convince myself that I was just too stressed, or maybe I was imagining it all. But that Saturday night, while I was lying in bed reading a book, the sound came again. This time, softer than before, but definitely the same woody groan. My heart was pounding, my body was tense. I stood up, turned off the light so I wouldn't be seen through the window, and looked out into the darkness. The courtyard was once again lit only by the dim moonlight, and I struggled to see through the zigzag shapes of the stacked tables. And then, the sound came again, a slow, deliberate stream. I could feel it as if something of considerable weight was moving on a fragile board, A cold feeling ran down my spine, my hands shook, and my breathing became shallow. Against my instincts, I put on my shoes and walked down the stairs, ignoring the pounding in my ears. When I got to the back door, I stopped for a moment, my body ready for anything. There were no signs, no one or anything moving. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, as if I were just the hunted in a game I had no control over. I stood there, quietly in the darkness, trying to concentrate on anything that could explain what was happening. My heart was still beating fast, but something urged me to continue. Even though I didn't want to admit it, a part of me knew that I couldn't simply ignore those strange footprints and creepy sounds. I looked out into the yard again, where darkness enveloped everything but the pale moonlight. Everything remained still, nothing changed. There are only old wooden tables and tree shadows extending from the edge of the yard. But I couldn't escape the eerie feeling that someone, or something, was still waiting for me just out of sight. My eyes scanned the shadows quickly, but there was nothing. I returned to the house, closed the door carefully and locked it. As I did so, I felt a strange disappointment. It felt like there was something outside waiting, something watching me. That feeling, no matter where I hide, still sticks with me. An invisible fear came over me, as if the building, the backyard, and everything I saw were starting to change in a way I couldn't control. The next day, when I talked to the bar owner again, I tried to be more careful, trying not to reveal my simmering insecurity. He still remained calm and asked me to just relax and not worry too much. But I saw a strange look on his face, a fleeting worry when I told him about those footprints. I gradually realized that he was not taking the matter lightly, but perhaps, like me, he also felt that something was not right. But he didn't want to admit it, and this confused me even more. Everything is as if there is a hazy curtain surrounding me, separating me from the truth, even though I know that something has changed in this space, something beyond the reach of reason. The next night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, the sounds of slamming doors and unidentified footsteps invade my mind. I felt my body tense up, every nerve on alert, as if I was living a life I wasn't completely in control of. That feeling kept me awake all night, my heart beating continuously, scared. One evening, I decided to face it. I can't live in this fear forever, and if something is truly threatening, I have to know. I went to the window and looked down at the yard. The moonlight had risen a little higher, illuminating part of the yard below. I stared into the darkness, my heart beating loudly in my chest. An eerie silence reigned, and only the wind blew gently, carrying a thin wisp of cold air. I took a flashlight and determined to go out. As I walked through the back door, I felt an invisible anxiety still clinging to me, as if someone was watching me from the shadows. Every step I took on the cracked ground sounded like my heels were echoing in the quiet space. But I can't stop. Walking through the yard, I saw nothing but old tables and darkness. The footprints are still there, as clear as that. They never disappeared. They last, with no end in sight, no apparent reason as to why they appear. I stopped, looked down, and for the first time, I felt a presence very close, as if I wasn't alone here. And then, I heard a noise. It was a light rustling sound, like something was moving in the dark near me. I turned around, flashlight still in hand, filled with fear. My eyes moved through every dark corner, searching for signs of something I couldn't explain. But nothing. Again, I felt an invisible force pulling me forward. This feeling, like a hand gently pushing me away. And then, a creaking sound was heard from the left, near the fence. I can't bear it anymore. I rushed towards it, walking faster, but when I got there, there was only darkness. Nothing. I stood still, breathing rapidly, my whole body tense. There were no more footprints, no other traces. All is darkness and silence. The feeling of being watched, that feeling still can't leave me. Suddenly I realized it, I couldn't escape. No matter how hard I try, these things, these sounds, these footprints, they will always follow me. It seemed I was attached to them, unable to escape, and I had to face them, or forever live in inexplicable fear. That feeling of fear could not be extinguished, it became stronger and stronger, as if an invisible presence was following me every step of the way. I tried to breathe evenly, trying to quell the paranoid thoughts floating around in my head. But no matter what I did, I couldn't escape that feeling, the feeling like something was watching me from the dark, waiting for me to come back. I stood there in the dark, looking around. The yard was as quiet as before, with no signs of anything strange, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The wooden tables stacked on top of each other were still there, the darkness was as thick as a curtain covering everything. My eyes searched for any sign, but there was nothing but impenetrable darkness. At this point, my anxiety was no longer just doubt. It turned into a distinct feeling, as if there was an undercurrent rising from beneath my feet, pulling me into deep waters from which I could not escape. I turned around, deciding that I had to go inside, but as I looked at the house, a strange feeling came over me. Everything inside me wanted to come back. Something compelled me to look back, to keep searching. I knew what I was doing, I was trying to find a logical reason for what I had just witnessed. But there's no reason at all. I turned back to the back door, my eyes unable to leave the darkness outside. I opened the door and immediately felt the cold air rush in. Stepping outside again, I felt like I was entering an invisible maze where every decision I made led to strange events I couldn't explain. What is waiting for me in that darkness? Suddenly, a noise sounded from my right, like a footstep, strong and unmistakable. My eyes immediately scanned the area, but there was no one there. There was no sign of anyone, no sign of any presence. However, I could feel a change in the air, as if an invisible curtain had been drawn, and I was the only one who couldn't see it. That thud sounded again, this time louder, clearer, as if something was moving very close to me. I turned around, my legs sagged, my hands shaking uncontrollably. It felt like an invisible hand was patting my shoulder. I didn't dare turn back, but an invisible force pulled me towards it. Once again, I walked towards the hallway, one step and then another. Fear began to cover my entire body. I searched for the light, searched for a sign that I was still in control, but the more I searched, the more I was drawn into the inexplicable darkness. And then, I saw it. Not a human figure, but a dark, shadowy figure, gliding through the hallway as if weightless. It had no clear shape, just a solid black mass, a shadow moving inexplicably. My heart almost stopped beating, I couldn't breathe. My breathing became heavy, my limbs trembled uncontrollably. I can't move. That shadow seemed to be moving towards me, step by slow, gentle step, as if knowing exactly where I was standing. A feeling of terror paralyzed me, as if I were trapped in an endless nightmare. All my thoughts are now shrouded in fear. Suddenly, light shined from the operating room, illuminating part of the hallway. The shadow stopped immediately, as if it realized it had been discovered. It stood there for a moment, then slowly, without a sound, it disappeared into the darkness, leaving no trace. I stood there, my heart pounding, as if I had fallen into an abyss from which I could not escape. I didn't dare move, I just stood still, trying to regain my composure. Somehow, I knew I had to find Dr. Caldwell, but I didn't know what to say. Would you believe me? Can you see what I've been through? With all my remaining strength, I walked quickly towards the operating room. My eyes scanned the shadows, but I didn't dare look back. My legs felt like they no longer belonged to me, but I knew I had to do this, I had to find out the truth. And I hope, deep down, that nothing more evil awaits me ahead. I walked into the operating room, not daring to look back. My legs were tired, and my mind felt like it was falling into a bottomless abyss. Dr. Caldwell was still focusing on his work, quietly preparing medical equipment, as if nothing was unusual. He looked up at me, a look of concern, but no sign of worry. "Ethan, what's wrong?" he asked, his voice calm, but I noticed something in his eyes. He didn't say it, but I could sense that he was worried about me, not because I was the patient, but because of something else, something he couldn't understand either. I stood there for a moment, trying to catch my breath and calm down, but all I could think about was the shadowy shadow, that shadow in the hallway, staring at me. I don't know what to do with these feelings anymore. Maybe I'm tired, maybe I'm just hallucinating from stress, but I know I can't continue living in this fear. Dr. Caldwell, I feel something in this building, I said, my voice choking. Something is following me, some darkness. I can't explain it, but I feel it's near. The doctor looked at me for a moment, his expression unchanged. Ethan, I understand you're stressed, but you can't let it control you like this. You're working under pressure, you just need a break, a real rest. Fatigue can make your mind go in directions we can't control. He was partly right. I was tired, I spent many sleepless nights, worried, scared. But I can't deny what I feel. That feeling, this strange presence in this room, was not my imagination. Doctor, I can't explain myself anymore, I continued, my hands shaking. There are noises, there are shadows, there are footprints that no one can explain. I don't know what to do anymore. The doctor stood up, walked closer to me, and patted my shoulder. I know you're worried, Ethan, but I didn't hear any noises. Nothing strange. Go home and get some rest. I promise nothing will happen. I looked into his eyes, and in that moment, I realized that there was something wrong with his statement. The confidence in his voice, his calmness, only seemed to increase my fear. I couldn't convince myself that he knew nothing about what I was going through. I felt something invisible between us, something even the doctor couldn't see, but I felt it clearly. He walked out, and I stood in the operating room, still unable to escape this strange feeling. The whole room, the entire clinic, seemed to be covered by an invisible layer of fog. Everything felt hazy, as if I was living in a nightmare that I couldn't escape from. I looked down at the table, where the surgical instruments were neatly arranged. But instead of feeling reassured, I felt a sudden rush of fear. These tools, these sharp scalpels and scissors, they are no longer just medical supplies. They became tools of something else, something I couldn't identify. Suddenly, I heard noises from the hallway. A creak, not from the door hinge, but from somewhere deep in the darkness. I turned around, but when I looked out the operating room door, there was nothing. The hallway was still quiet, no one was there. But a strange feeling still rose inside me. I can't stand here any longer. I cannot let fear control me. I must find the truth, must know what is lurking in this darkness. I decided not to hesitate any longer. I walked out, determined to face what I couldn't understand. As I entered the hallway, the fluorescent lights began to flicker again. Each flicker of light made the space more dim, making everything around me hazy, as if I were walking through a layer of thick black fog. Every step I took was like a loud noise amidst the silence. My feet felt like they no longer belonged to me, heavy and difficult, as if I were walking through a thick layer of clay. And then, I heard that noise again. A thud, very close. My heart was beating so hard that I couldn't breathe. I stopped, standing still in the darkness, my eyes quickly scanning every corner of the hallway. Nobody. There was no silhouette, but there was something else. A strange feeling still covers me. I could feel a presence nearby, but I couldn't see it. I continued walking, determined not to turn back. I walked towards the end of the hallway, where the light had faded. As I approached, a large black shadow flashed, then immediately disappeared. In just a split second, I saw it, a large, beckoning shape, passing by me as if weightless. My eyes opened wide in panic. I can't keep seeing it anymore. The feeling of being watched, that sense of presence, grew stronger and stronger. And I know that I can't go back. What I am experiencing is not my imagination. They are part of something larger, something inexplicable. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think clearly. That shadow, large and vague, disappeared as soon as I tried to get a better look. But the strange feeling still didn't leave me. It was as if it was haunting me, pulling me into a world I couldn't understand, a place with no room for reason or explanation. The fluorescent light is no longer just flashing but is flashing more strongly. Dark shadows danced on the walls, as if this space was changing with every moment. The hallway stretched before me, dark and dim, like a nightmare that was slowly swallowing everything. And I, despite my fear, must move forward. I don't know if I'm running away or moving forward. But one thing I know is, this silence is not normal. Not the normal quiet of the night, but an eerie silence, like a thin cloth covering this world, blocking all sounds and movements. My steps were heavy, but I still couldn't stop. I kept going, even though my heart was beating so loudly that I could barely hear anything else besides that beat. Every step I took, I felt that presence, something following me, right behind, but invisible. It was a strange feeling, like an invisible hand was pushing me forward. When I reached the end of the hallway, light suddenly shone from the operating room door, brightening up part of the space. I didn't have time to look back, but the feeling I could feel was that there was something right behind me. Something was chasing me, but I couldn't turn around to see what it was. I entered the operating room with a mind full of anxiety. My legs seemed to no longer belong to me. Dr. Caldwell was standing there, looking at me intently. He didn't say anything, just looked at me quietly, as if he realized something was wrong. I stood there, sweating coldly, feeling like I was standing in front of an abyss that I couldn't escape from. "Are you okay, Ethan?" Dr. Caldwell asked, but his voice was a bit worried, different from his previous calmness. I looked at him, but couldn't answer. I couldn't put into words what I felt, about the shadow, about the invisible presence watching me. It's too difficult to explain. It was not ordinary fear, but a feeling deep in the heart, as if something scary was about to explode. "I don't know," I said, my voice almost choking. "But I can't help but feel that there is something waiting for me in this place." Dr. Caldwell looked at me for a long moment, as if thinking about what I had just said. He didn't say anything, just sighed softly, then returned to his work. The feeling of restlessness inside me did not subside. In fact, it grew stronger and stronger, as if things were starting to get out of control. That shadow, that feeling of being watched still exists within me. I know I can't continue living in this anxiety, but I also can't ignore it. It clung to me like a ghost that couldn't be dismissed. I returned to the reception area, trying to get used to the space again, but it wasn't the same. The space became heavy, the air seemed compressed. Every sound, no matter how small, resonates strongly in my ears. And then, as I sat down at my desk, I heard another noise. A slight, click sound, like a door being pushed open. I stood up, the light faded, and a strange feeling spread through me again. I don't know what to do anymore. This feeling is too real, too strong for me to deny. I cannot continue to live in this fear. I must find out the truth. Stepping away from my desk, I walked towards the hallway again, but this time, I couldn't escape the feeling that something was waiting for me ahead. This strange feeling was like a warning, as if I was entering a cursed area without knowing the outcome. Every step I take, I can clearly feel the change in space. The silence is no longer peace but a nightmare that is slowly becoming reality. I headed towards the supply room, where I had seen strange footprints, and entered. The door closed behind me. I felt like everything was getting out of control, and that presence was waiting, right outside. When I entered the supply room, the space inside made me feel even heavier. The wooden shelves are neatly arranged, but the air here seems stagnant, without a breath of wind. I stood there, feeling the tension spread throughout my body. The darkness seems to have penetrated into every little corner of this room. My eyes scanned the shelves, trying to find some trace, but everything was in place, nothing was out of place. Even so, I still felt something lurking in the darkness, an inexplicable presence. Suddenly I felt like someone was standing behind me, right next to me. I turned around, but there was nothing. It's not my imagination, I told myself, but there was a distinct uncertainty in my voice. I can't bear it anymore. Everything, the noise, the darkness, the feeling of being watched, seemed about to burst into something invisible but extremely terrifying. I walked quickly out of the room, my legs shaking, as if I was running away from something impossible to confront. By the time I got back to the reception area, I realized I couldn't continue living like this. My eyes stopped, trying to find safety in familiar things. I looked at the dimly lit lights, the everyday objects, the unorganized documents. These things seemed to be the only stability left in this world, but I couldn't ignore the feeling that even those objects were engulfing me in strangeness and inexplicability. At this time, Dr. Caldwell appeared again in the reception area. He looked at me worriedly, and I realized I wasn't the only one who sensed something was wrong. He was paying attention to my tension, but couldn't do much more than stand there, looking at me as if he was wondering if I was having a paranoid attack. "You're not okay, Ethan," he said, his voice gentle, but a little suspicious. "I can't go on like this anymore," I admitted, looking straight at him. "There's something in this room. There's a shadow. I don't know what to call it. And the noises, those noises, doctor, they're not my hallucinations. They're real." The doctor looked at me for a long time, as if he was trying to figure out if I was telling the truth, or if I was just going through a period of psychological stress. But then he nodded, as if he understood something I hadn't yet seen. "Don't stress too much, Ethan. What you feel may be due to fatigue. But if you really feel that there is something unusual, I will assist you with a closer examination," he said. I looked at him, feeling like there was an invisible distance between us, as if he didn't understand the severity of what I was going through. Part of me wants to believe that everything is just an illusion, that I'm making things complicated out of fear. But the rest of me, the part that couldn't explain, insisted that I was facing something beyond my understanding. "Do you believe me?" I asked, my voice barely under control. The doctor paused for a moment, then nodded. "I believe you, but we need to face it rationally. If there's anything unusual, we'll deal with it together." A strange sense of comfort enveloped me, but I couldn't escape the tension that was still present in every fiber of my being. I returned to the reception area and sat down, trying to concentrate. However, everything still seems to be hovering and unstable. Suddenly, a loud noise rang out from behind, the sound of a door slamming shut. I stood up, but this time, nothing happened. I looked around, but saw nothing but long shadows in the hallway. I turned around, feeling vaguely that things had changed. A strange silence enveloped me, there was no sign of anything threatening me anymore. After a moment, I returned to Dr. Caldwell, feeling like I was emerging from a nightmare. His face didn't change, but the way he looked at me was different. I realized that perhaps we are all lost in a space without a reasonable explanation. Maybe I was wrong, I sighed. Maybe everything is just in my head. The doctor did not respond immediately. He just looked at me, as if thinking about something deeper. Finally, he smiled gently. "Maybe you need a break. Don't let these thoughts take over. The feeling can go away once you give yourself time." But no matter what he said, the strange feeling didn't leave me. Yes, I can forget about it for now, but I know that those shadows, those feelings of being watched and strange sounds, will still stick with me. Not because I don't want to believe in reason, but because there is something in this space, in this very room, that cannot be explained. One winter night, as cold air seeped into every corner of the apartment, I woke up again, the light from the neon lights outside filtering through the dim window. These strange feelings never left me. In the quiet darkness, the footprints continued to haunt me, still huge, eerie indentations that I couldn't ignore. Every time I looked out the window, everything seemed wrong, and the building's backyard still felt like a trap, waiting quietly. There was definitely no one there, but those footprints, they didn't look like human footprints, or at least not like any footprints I'd ever seen. They seemed wider and longer, as if they belonged to some inexplicable creature. There was no sign on the ground that anyone had passed through an exit. It all just stopped suddenly, as if their creator disappeared into thin air. Day by day, I began to feel like I no longer recognized myself. Feeling increasingly tense, space becomes cramped. Even in the quietest moments, I can't shake the feeling like something is watching me. I always feel threatened by an invisible force that I cannot explain. I decided to find out more. One morning when I was tired from the constant stress, I decided to check out the backyard area during the day. At this point, I tried to convince myself that I was just having a normal test, nothing to worry about. I grabbed the crowbar, my palms wet with sweat. It felt as if something was pushing me to do this, to face what was haunting me. I scanned the entire yard, turned over tables and chairs, pushed old tables aside, but found nothing unusual. It was just old furniture, rotting chairs, and wet ground. There was no trace of a secret passage, no sign that anyone had entered the area secretly. The fence is solid, without any cracks. The walls surrounding the yard are too high and slippery for anyone to climb over. But the footprints are still there, still coming back night after night, constantly haunting me. The feeling of confusion and fear becomes stronger day by day. In my deprived sleep, I found myself struggling in inexplicable darkness. Every time I closed my eyes, that strange sound rang in my ears, rustling sounds, invisible footsteps. Even during the day, when I thought I was free from the haunting, I saw tiny figures flitting out of the corner of my eye, and when I turned around there was nothing but empty space. Every morning, I wake up with an empty feeling, my body is tired and short of breath. The bathroom mirror reflected a pale, tired face, confused eyes, as if I was living in a never-ending nightmare. I felt like I was slowly losing touch with reality, my memories of footprints and shadows becoming blurry, as if I was living in an inexplicable parallel world. I can't explain myself anymore. Every time I walked across the yard, every time I looked at those footprints, I wondered if I was making things more complicated by creating fantasies in my head. But then there was a feeling, an invisible presence, that I couldn't forget. Surely I'm not the only one who has noticed these strange things. Everything became blurred. I no longer knew what was real and what was an illusion. One night, I decided to go back again and go into the yard to check those footprints. When I walked down the stairs, my body trembled, but I couldn't stop walking. I know I can't live in this worry forever. I must know the truth. But when I entered the yard, a cold feeling enveloped me. Suddenly, I heard a noise from behind, like someone was dragging something heavy across the ground. I turned around, but didn't see anyone. I took a deep breath, trying to dispel the fear rising in my chest. I continued to scan the yard, walking step by step, my eyes searching for some trace, but I found nothing. Everything was just silent and still. But as soon as I turned my back, I saw a new footprint, right under my feet. No sign of an object, no way out. This footprint, like all the others, had no origin, just appeared suddenly and disappeared into the darkness. I can't bear it anymore. A feeling of suffocation rose within me. I ran towards the back door, my hands shaking as I locked the door behind me. But as soon as I turned around, I realized that there was something very strange. The back door is no longer locked. Once again, I opened the door, and this time I saw nothing but darkness. I stood there, cold sweat running down my spine as the strange noises came from the backyard again. Every creak, every scratch of wood on concrete was a warning of that presence. My heart was beating so hard that I could feel each beat, like a scary song playing in my head. I felt like I couldn't breathe, as if an invisible weight was pressing on my chest. I quickly closed the door behind me, the light from the flashlight in my hand shaking. Unable to bear it anymore, I went back into the apartment. Fear was like a black curtain covering everything. Even though I did everything I could to convince myself that I was just hallucinating, there was no denying that something was haunting me. A presence that I cannot explain. The feeling that something invisible was watching me in the dark. I can't continue living like this anymore. The fear grew thicker and took over my mind. I packed my things hastily, not daring to spend another night in that apartment. My mind was chaotic, my heart was pounding. Even though I moved away, that feeling still hasn't left me. The footprints and silhouettes passing through the corner of my eyes are still there, clinging to me like a never-ending nightmare. Days passed, I tried to start a new life, but I couldn't dispel the image of those footprints, of the strange shadow that I had never seen clearly. Even though I live in a different place, there are times when I wake up in the middle of the night, feeling like someone is near me. It's as if I can never truly escape it. Those sounds, those footprints, they still come back in my mind, as if they were a part of me. I cannot explain this incident. Everything keeps repeating in an endless circle. Maybe it's just a product of my imagination. But every time I hear the creak of wood, or see shadows in the dark night, I can't help but feel that there is something inexplicable, lurking around me, always following me, no matter where I run. And then, another night, when I felt like I was ready to face what had happened, I walked out onto the field, trying to find a reason for all the strange events I had witnessed. But everything is still the same. Footprints, darkness, strange silence, all serve as a reminder that there are things we will never understand. The inexplicable feeling appeared within me again, a vague fear that made my mind spin. Even though the building was quiet, my every step echoed on the carpeted floor, and the shadows lurking in every corner seemed to be watching me, making me unable to escape the feeling of being a target. I felt as if something invisible was trying to touch me, passing me in the darkness. As I walked past the rows of tables, I saw a vague, indeterminate shadow. I stopped, my heart stopped beating when I felt that presence. A jolt made me almost drop the coffee cup in my hand. I hurried forward, but as soon as the faint light shone on the table, I saw the chair was empty, but it felt like someone had just sat there. The seat was cold, the computer was on, and my power cord touched something invisible. Adrenaline surged through me, all my nerves were tense like guitar strings, and I felt an invisible coldness. I approached the table, not daring to leave that chair, even though I knew for sure that no one was sitting there. That feeling makes it hard to breathe. It felt like someone was watching me, following every move. I turned around, trying to find a reasonable explanation for what I was feeling. That feeling is not an illusion, but it is difficult to believe what you are experiencing. Hurriedly, I went to the security room, where cameras were monitored 24/7. I asked them to check the recording in the area I had just passed. After a few tense minutes, they came back with a cold answer: nothing in the shot. The cold feeling spreads more and more inside me. What is the truth? Why do I feel like something is following me? Whether I want to believe it or not, part of me is very confused, doubting myself. Am I really losing my mind? Or is there really something strange going on in this building? When I left the security room, my body still hadn't relaxed. The feeling of fear did not go away, but only grew stronger. I can still feel that presence, lurking somewhere in the air, following my every step. I could even hear a strange sound from behind, which served as a warning sign. I walked out of the building, not daring to look back, but the feeling of fear still clung to me. I wonder if I can really get away with it. What I experienced was not just a nightmare, but a reminder of an invisible presence, of things that cannot be explained. Maybe it has been there all along, always observing me without me even realizing it. This feeling won't let me go easily. Even if I ran away, I still couldn't dispel that fear. It was ingrained in my mind, like a ghost that would never let go. One of my footsteps echoed on the smooth tile floor, creating a noise that echoed in the strange silence of the hallway. The air in the building felt heavy, as if everything was waiting, holding back an inevitable event. Even though the hallway lights were on, the light was dim, as if they no longer had enough power to illuminate the hidden corners of this space. That feeling rose within me. It became more and more clear that there was a presence lurking somewhere in the darkness. My legs were heavy, my hands were shaking holding the flashlight, the light from it flashed and then faded as if something was blocking it. The sound of my footsteps echoed in the quiet space, but another sound suddenly entered my ears, as soft as someone's breathing from afar. I stopped. My heart was pounding, my throat was tight, and a feeling of frustration rose in my chest. I turned around, but there was no one. There were still only empty walls and the cold light of the hallway. I kept walking, but now every step I took rang out like a warning in the silence. I reached the end of the hallway, where there was a door leading into the conference room. The light of the flashlight flashed in the dark space before my eyes. The cracks in the wall, the narrow dark corners, and the feeling that there was something hidden behind every hidden corner made me unable to calm down anymore. I opened the door slowly, light shone into the room, but there was nothing but tables, chairs, and items in the room that no one used. Suddenly, I felt a cold run down my spine. A small noise came from behind, a light sound like a knock on the door, but very clear in the silence of the night. It felt like someone was standing right behind me, but when I turned around, there was nothing but darkness. The flashlight's light didn't seem strong enough to dispel the waiting shadow, a shadow that I couldn't see but could clearly feel. I swallowed my saliva and tried to breathe evenly, but my breathing became rapid and uncontrollable. At this point, I can't stop. I forced myself to face what was happening, to move forward and search for an explanation. But deep inside, I knew that I couldn't understand what was happening. Every step I took felt more and more like a step into a strange land, where logic and reason were no longer valid. And then, finally, I stopped in front of another door, the last door of the hallway, where I knew something was waiting for me. But when I opened that door, all I saw was an empty room, just like every other room in this building. There are only tables, chairs, and objects of unknown purpose. But at this moment, another noise rang out from deep in the darkness, and this time, I was sure that something was approaching. The feeling of fear could no longer be contained. My heart felt like it was about to burst, and I turned and ran toward the door. But now, there was nothing but darkness, and I felt like I was sinking into a never-ending nightmare. The door closed behind me, but I knew I couldn't escape it. This is not a dream. This was real, and I was completely out of control. What I experienced, what I felt, it all seemed beyond my ability to explain. And I know that I will never be able to escape what is clinging to me. I still can't escape the feeling that there is something unexplained, an invisible force that follows me even when I try to push it out of my head. The light of day could not assuage my growing fear. Every time I had to stay up late, I felt that I was not alone in that empty building. The feeling of stress always follows me, quietly lurking in the shadows of the office. Late one night, I was secretly sitting in a corner of my office, clutching a flashlight, trying to stay awake. The light from my computer screen only added to the loneliness, as the building around me became eerily quiet. Suddenly, a noise as soft as a whisper echoed from the dark corners. It was a sound I was all too familiar with. I couldn't see anyone, but the feeling of being watched rose strongly within me. I turned around, my flashlight shining in the silence of the hallway, and I couldn't believe what I saw. The dim flickering light from the hallway lamp seemed to draw moving silhouettes beyond my vision. Everything was still, but I could clearly feel that presence, almost palpable, right next to me. My heart beat faster, my throat tightening as I stood up and walked towards the window. My eyes couldn't leave the blurry images out there, as if something was waiting. I can't explain that strange feeling. Every reason in me told me to leave this place, but a part of me couldn't let go. The feeling that someone was watching me, following me from room to room, had become an obsession that could not be shaken off. Every night, as I walked through the hallway, I felt the darkness seem to stretch and envelop me, leaving no light behind. I began to doubt whether I was really living in reality, or if I had been caught up in a world I couldn't understand. One night, while I was working late, I suddenly heard a strange noise, like someone's footsteps gently walking through the hallway. This time, I couldn't bear it anymore. I stood up, ran into the hallway and shined my flashlight around, but all I saw were empty walls, not a single person in sight. I felt overwhelmed and didn't know what to do. I hurried back to my room and closed the door, panting. But a part of me still feels like something is standing out there, listening to my every move. I was starting to lose control. Every day, I try to look for signs that make sense, but all I get is eerie silence and the feeling like I'm living in a never-ending nightmare. Long sleepless nights, strange sounds, and unexplained signs only added to my confusion. Finally, I realized there was no way out of this. No matter what I did, I still felt an invisible presence watching me, invading my mind, making me unable to relax even in broad daylight. And in a moment of utter fear, I wondered if I really understood what was happening, or if it was all just paranoia that I couldn't shake. I nodded, trying to act calm, but inside I felt like a wave was rising, weighing down every thought. I tried to respond with a weak smile, but maybe he saw the worry on my face, because his eyes became more attentive, as if he too was sensing the tension in the air. "It's okay," I said, my voice a bit hoarse. "It's just, there's been some strange things going on lately." He stared at me for a moment, as if he wanted to say something, but then fell silent, just shook his head and went back to his work. I couldn't help but feel that something was wrong. Even though he didn't say anything, I could sense a strangeness in his demeanor, as if he also noticed something unusual. Stepping into the store, I felt like the space around me was shrinking. Every step I took seemed to resonate in the silence, and I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched. The hum of the refrigerator, the sound of my shoes on the floor, even the sound of my own breathing seemed to become too loud in a space that was too quiet. As I stood waiting for my coffee, I couldn't help but turn and look towards the glass door, where the silhouette of a man was still standing near the pumps. He still didn't move, just standing there, as if waiting for something. The atmosphere between us seemed more tense than ever. I turned away, not wanting to look any further, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger. When I received my coffee, I tried to get out quickly, away from this stuffy space. However, as soon as I left the store, an uneasy feeling stuck with me, as if something was still following me. I can't explain this feeling, but I feel like I've left something behind, something invisible but always present, lingering around me. I rushed out into the parking lot, my feet feeling heavy as if I were stepping through mud. That feeling, the feeling like there was a dark shadow chasing me, never leaving. I turned around to look again, but saw nothing but an empty parking lot, cars parked silently under the dim lights. I don't know what happened that night, or if something really was stalking me in the dark. But I can't erase that strange feeling. The feeling that I am not alone, no matter where I am, no matter what I try. And from that moment on, no matter how hard I tried to avoid it, I couldn't help but feel that something was still remaining in the darkness, following my every step, even when I had left that place, even when I couldn't explain it anymore. But when night comes, that feeling returns. Every step I took through the apartment seemed heavier, as if someone was following me, even though I couldn't see anything. Sometimes, when I turned around, would see that the darkness behind me was thicker, as if something was lurking in there, just waiting for a certain moment to reveal itself. One night, when I woke up halfway, I realized that the atmosphere in the room had changed. It felt colder, heavier, as if an invisible presence filled the space around me. My heart was pounding, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It felt like a ghost reaching out, lurking in the dark spaces of my bedroom. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, that stress, anxiety, and fatigue made me see something no one else could see. However, that presence did not disappear. I began to feel that I was in a game that I had no control over, as if someone, was controlling everything without my knowledge. Sometimes, when I step outside, I hear that scratching sound again, that gentle screeching sound on the window. Every time I opened the door, there was only darkness and silence, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking in there, watching my every step. I started avoiding places where I felt that presence. I no longer dared to go into the yard where I had seen the strange man standing before. The more I avoided those places, the more I felt like I was falling into a trap I couldn't escape from. The feeling of being watched never left me. Every day, I feel more and more tired, not only because of work but also because of the fear that is gradually taking over me. I don't know if I'm losing the ability to distinguish between reality and fantasy, but every night I wake up in this fear, I begin to doubt myself, no longer knowing whether I can continue to live like this. The story seems to be leading you into a dark space, where feelings of insecurity and invisible surveillance haunt every step. You feel like there is something or someone lurking in the dark, waiting for a certain moment to reveal itself, making everything around you scary and inexplicable. Traveling from one location to another, whether in everyday life or when you drive through desolate areas, continues to bring confusion and incomprehensible fear. No matter how much you try to ignore or explain everything, that feeling will never let you go. As you talk about your friend, Alan, and how he could suddenly leave without saying goodbye, you seem to start to realize that his disappearance could be a sign of something more terrifying that you're not ready to face. The inexplicable traces, the undeniable sense of surveillance, create a space where everything seems hidden under layers of darkness and silence, as the houses, hallways, and spaces that should have been shelters become mysteriously empty. Your story is gradually becoming more haunting, with every step and every moment you encounter unexplained phenomena. Something is unclear, maybe it's the tension of the mind or something truly real, but on quiet nights, you can't be sure if you're living in a dream or reality. That ambiguity continues to haunt you, drawing you into inexplicable spaces. The end of the story can open up a new twist, where unrevealed things will slowly unravel, and your friend Alan can be an important factor in unlocking the mystery surrounding you. This story makes you wonder if the strange events could be part of a larger conspiracy, or if they are just the work of an exhausted mind, led to hallucinations and uncontrollable fears. The more I tried to make sense of what was happening, the more its strangeness increased exponentially. Every night, I remind myself that everything is just stress or a paranoia caused by fatigue and exhaustion, but every time I wake up with cold sweat on my forehead, I can't deny that something is wrong in this apartment. After consecutive incidents, my insecurity became even stronger. I couldn't explain why the window opened for no apparent reason. I also can't deny that the feeling of being watched is always present in the moments I return to the apartment after work. That feeling made me uneasy, as if I was always being watched from some hidden corner in the dark. And the strange thing is, every time I think I'm about to figure it all out, a new event happens that makes everything even murkier. With the restless nights, I began to doubt myself. Are these strange things a product of fatigue and stress at work? Or is there really something invisible in my apartment? I couldn't believe what I saw, but that inexplicable feeling still stuck with me, making it impossible for me to live peacefully in my own space. And then, one night, I heard the creaking sounds again, but this time, it wasn't from the window. It's from the hallway. A gentle, but steady sound. Footsteps lightly passed each wall, as if someone was walking through my room that I couldn't see. I stood motionless, not daring to move. My heart was pounding, I could clearly hear the sound of my veins in my ears. When the sound stopped, I walked out, my legs unsteady, my hands shaking holding the flashlight. But there was no one there. There is only darkness, only silence. However, this silence was so heavy that it was unbearable. I couldn't utter a word, just stood there helplessly. When I returned to the bedroom, I felt a sudden wave of coldness wash over me, as if the atmosphere in the room had changed. Something invisible was watching me. No matter how hard I tried to deny it, it was still present, deep in my mind, making it impossible for me to escape the feeling that I was being watched. Am I creating this fear for myself, or is there really something unexplainable going on in this apartment? I can't say for sure, but that feeling has never left me, whether I left or not. That fear stuck with me like a shadow that never disappeared, until now, when I write these lines. The strange sounds, the unsettling feelings, all of it changed me forever, forcing me to live with a constant, inexplicable, undeniable fear. The strange feeling of leaving the apartment still lingered with me as I walked out the door, as if something was unfinished. I feel like I'm running away from something, but I can't leave comfortably. Every step out of that space feels like another step into uncertainty. The apartment I had called home for a year now felt empty, not only physically but also emotionally. I couldn't deny the change in the atmosphere of that room. Something invisible but strong, as if a ghost had taken root in it. Even though we tried to rationalize everything, find reasons for the strange events, I still couldn't explain why all those things happened. Strange noises, flashing lights, and even windows that open on their own, all of these can't be mere coincidences. When Alan and I finally drove away, I looked back once more, my gaze lingering on the empty apartment. A strange feeling, as if I had left a part of myself there, a part that I couldn't get back. As we entered the hotel and closed the door behind us, part of me still felt tense, like something was unfinished. I don't know if I can go back to that place. But what I'm sure of is, once I leave, nothing there will be the same as before. Day after day, I tried to forget what happened, but that presence never truly left. Sometimes at night, I still hear strange sounds, like gentle scratching in the distance, as if someone was still watching me. Part of me wondered if I was the only one hearing those sounds, or if anyone else had experienced similar things. Finally, I realized that some memories will never fade, and some feelings will never go away. They will stay with me, not like a haunting but a part of my past, always reminding me that there are things in this world that reason cannot explain. The strange events in that apartment changed me forever, and no matter how much I try, I will never forget that feeling, the feeling of being watched, of being monitored, as if something invisible was waiting for me to step into its sights again. And maybe that's what makes me never go back to that place again, because I can't bear the thought that something is still lurking in the dark, waiting, watching, and maybe never letting go. I no longer have the courage to continue with work. I felt a fear rising inside me, almost choking me. That feeling, that something was right behind me, made it impossible for me to stand still. The swaying light and silhouette only flashed once, but it was deeply imprinted in my mind. I stood there, unable to breathe, unable to move, just feeling my chest tighten and my limbs shaking. As soon as the lights returned to normal, nothing but silent darkness enveloped the room. I turned around, staring into the attic. There was no one there. But that feeling, that inexplicable feeling, still exists. It's not a nightmare. It was something very real, very close, as if the space around me had changed. With a great effort, I began to walk down the stairs, step by step, feeling like each step was getting heavier. My throat was dry and breathing became difficult. I knew what I had to do, I had to face my fear, but I couldn't. Everything around me became blurry, as if I was living in another dimension. A space where everything can change in the blink of an eye. I walked into my bedroom, closed the door, but nothing changed. Even though my room was closed, I still felt something in the darkness, staring at me. I listened to my breathing, each breath a sign of existence, a reminder that I'm still here, but not alone. The next day, I decided to leave that apartment. I couldn't take it anymore, and I felt like this space itself was swallowing me whole. During the following days, I prepared my luggage and arranged everything to leave. Even though I closed all the windows and doors, the feeling that something was watching me never went away. It's that uncomfortable feeling of knowing that I can't escape what happened, that something still clings to me. Finally, I left, without looking back. When I walked out, I felt like I was escaping a long nightmare. But in some part of me, that feeling still exists. The feeling of not being able to escape the darkness, the feeling that someone is always watching me. And I know that, no matter where I go, I will never completely escape that presence of stress and fatigue. But every step I took, every strange noise, every strange feeling only made it harder for me to convince myself that these were hallucinations. It feels like something is moving with me, with every step, every sound, every darkness that gradually rises. Every time I turned around, I felt like I was facing not only space but also the fears deep within my mind. I walked closer to the giant pressing machine, my heart pounding, as if each beat was a warning. The darkness seemed to be getting thicker and thicker, lingering in the faint strips of light that my flashlight emitted. The feeling that something invisible, inexplicable, was following me, made me unable to relax anymore. New footprints in the dust beneath my feet, as if someone had passed through here before me, tracks with no clear explanation. This space was strange, not just because it was silent or because of the damage to the machines that had not worked for a long time, but because of the strange feeling it created, a feeling as if all these objects had their own lives. And when I turned back, I suddenly realized I was not alone in this space. My heart beat harder as a metallic sound echoed off the cement walls. There was a strong crash, like a heavy object had fallen to the ground. I stopped, trying to distinguish the noise. It's not like an object falls naturally. It carried a strange cohesion, as if someone had intentionally created it to attract my attention. I slowly walked towards the source of the sound, not sure if I really wanted to know what I was facing or not. Part of me wanted to turn back, wanted to leave this place, but another part urged me to keep going. I felt like I was being drawn into an invisible game, one that I couldn't escape from. Every sound became heavy, every step echoed strangely in the quiet space. The feeling of being watched, of being monitored, never left me. As I approached the storage area, I heard another rattling sound, this time more distinct. I stopped, not daring to move forward, just listening. A light scratching sound as if someone was moving behind the old machine parts. This sound kept repeating, as if I was being led into an area I couldn't escape from. Then suddenly, a metal door creaked open, gently but clearly, as if some invisible force was manipulating everything in this space. I felt my heart beating so strongly that I could hear it ringing in my ears. I felt like I couldn't breathe. This dark night is no longer a night like any other. It turned into a confrontation with things I couldn't explain. As the weak light of the flashlight shone into the room inside, I suddenly realized I couldn't continue anymore. I turned around, rushed out of that area, and didn't dare look back. The feeling of an invisible shadow, an inexplicable feeling has followed me throughout this journey. And I don't know if I can leave this place completely. Today's story has ended. Thank you for taking the time to listen and accompany the Dark Storyteller. Your support is the biggest motivation for me to continue bringing more fascinating and scary stories. If you like this story, don't forget to click like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next thrilling ghost stories. And please leave a comment sharing your thoughts. I always read everyone's comments. See you again in the next stories. Wishing you a peaceful night.